Excellent. Good evening and welcome. Today is Tuesday, December 13th, 2022, and this is a regular meeting of the Governing Board of the Litchfield Elementary School District. This meeting is hereby called to order. We will begin our meeting as always with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and join me if you are able. You may be seated. Please join me in a moment of silent reflection. Thank you. Before we move on to agenda item 3A, I would just like to note that we received word that Board Member Honak would not be joining us this evening. However, he is welcome to join at any point virtually, and if he does, I will make that known to the board members. Agenda item 3A is recognitions and celebrations, and that will be presented by Director Nuanez.
Madam President, members of the Governing Board, Superintendent Gunning. Tonight we'd like to celebrate all of our LASD nurses. Their dedication to the health and welfare of our students and staff is immeasurable. From Band-Aids and scrapes, annual vision and hearing screenings, leading staff and students to the best health practices as we came out of this pandemic was really crucial. To managing and administering medications to our students with chronic conditions and those with special needs. They are the key to keeping our students healthy and in school. So let's take a little look at a short video that highlights some of their work.
How's your morning? Kids get sick. They get fevers in the middle of the day. They have a sore throat, they have a stomach ache, they get headaches because it's too loud in the cafeteria, they haven't drank water. Put that on your head and just watch it, okay? Reach some water. We have a lot of kids who have taken medications that they need, so we manage nutrition. We have a lot of kids with chronic illnesses, unfortunately, and so we manage their care plan. It was open sugar this morning. It's kind of like a seasoning full. A minor cough, sore throat to broken bone, concussion. They're probably type 1 diabetic, and they have to monitor their blood glucose levels throughout the day. Ready for your medicine? Go with the nurse. Makes the parents feel more comfortable sending their kids to school because they know that there is somebody there who understands their kids' condition and will take care of them. I think that they really know that, being the most and as well as continuing not only, having teachers here in my office. Still not feeling better? Come lay down over here and tell mom it's okay. This is Jill Smith from Bella Soto School Nurse. How are you? If there wasn't this nurse in the school, then that responsibility would fall on the teachers, the office staff, and that would just be a lot of extra stress on them. Don't have the knowledge and background that nurses do to manage and know those conditions. So that would be a major downfall for our community staff as well. But I'll have to get our stuff together. Thank you. Have a great day.
Now that is just a very small sample of all the tremendous work that all of our nurses do. So tonight we truly would like to celebrate all of our nurses. Can I ask you to come up real quick and take a picture? Yes, we do. Yeah, squeeze right on in there. Get your face back to each other.
Before we move on, Director Nuanez, I would just like to also acknowledge and thank our voters for passing the override this fall, because as most of us know, that money funds our nurses on each of our campuses. So a note of gratitude to the voters for their support.
Absolutely. Now we would also like to congratulate and celebrate our newest board member, Ryan Owens, who will take his seat effective January 1, 2023. Ryan is a dedicated parent who has vocalized a passion for creating the best educational experience for LESD students. We look forward to his service and support of LESD students and teachers. Ryan. We'd also like to congratulate and celebrate our current board president, Kimberly Moran. Her passion to serve the staff and the students of LESD is truly appreciated. We appreciate as you continue your tenure on the governing board, and we look forward to your continued support. And last but definitely not least, Dr. Dennis Dowling. He has brought over 40 years of leadership in the military, government, private business, and public education to honorably serve the students, staff, and community of LESD. His more than 2 decades of classroom and administrative leadership was instrumental to increasing student achievement and identifying models for student success. Dr. Dowling, we will truly, truly miss your presence. But most of all, I think Executive Director Vaughn is going to miss your financial questions and long talks. All joking aside, we really, truly thank you for your support and service to our school community. And now Superintendent Gunning, on behalf of the entire Litchfield Elementary School District, would like to present you with this recognition award. Once again, Dr. Dowling, truly thank you for all your support and your service to our community.
Thank you. I would also like to offer my personal gratitude to you, Dr. Dowling, for your over the past year of service. I've learned a lot from you, and I truly believe that this board is going to have a hole in it where you filled the educator and district administrator role for us and really helped provide some different perspectives than what the rest of us as board members have experienced and our areas of expertise. So you will be truly missed, and I wish you well. Thank you.
Go ahead. I'd also like to say, I think a few of us on this panel have been in the place that Dr. Dowling was just a year ago, being appointed to the board and sort of coming midstream when someone else had resigned. And it's not the easiest place to be all the time. And you slid right in as a member of the team and acted like there was no time to waste. And so I appreciate that you, as Kim said, just brought your experience and gave us knowledge that we just hadn't previously had on this board. So thank you for your wisdom and your calm presence, which was definitely needed during most of our board meetings. And you'll be missed. So thank you.
I too would like to say how much I've learned from you as a board member. You have brought an expertise to here that we did not have previously with the admin side. That's definitely been helpful. And I think that, to mirror what Kim said, there's definitely going to be a hole now with you not on the board. So you will be missed. And we hope that we'll still hear from you because you're still part of this community and you can still give us insight to things. So hopefully we'll still hear from you.
And we, of course, would love to have you sub in our classrooms anytime you have a free moment. We are now going to take a short break for some refreshments to celebrate what needs to be celebrated. So we will return. Thank you. hereby reconvene this meeting of the Governing Board of Litchfield Elementary School District, and we will resume with item 3D, Fall 2022 A through F School Letter Grades Presentation, which will be presented by Director Owen.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam President, members of the Governing Board, and Madam Superintendent. First, allow me to introduce myself. I am Brian Owen, Director of Assessment Accountability here for the Litchfield Elementary School District. I would like to point out that's not to be confused with Ryan Owens, the newly elected board member. And I wish he was still in the room so you could see we are two different people. Yeah. Here in Litchfield, our department strives to ensure alignment to state standards and expectation, provide the highest quality data and professional development, and deliver the most informative measures of student academic growth. I always like to include this slide. This sort of sorts out our main objectives into the 4 pillars that we strive for here at Litchfield. So if you remember back at the October study session, we presented details about how the then upcoming A through F letter grade public release would be calculated. So just to refresh the memory, these are the model components. I'll go through them really quickly. And if you have questions, please stop me. I won't get into the detail that we got into in October. The measures of growth will count for 50 points of the 100 points here with the Litchfield schools. The calculation of proficiency accounts for 30 points. The English learner calculation, which is both language proficiency and growth on the English language assessment, 10 points. And then a series of indicators that they refer to as acceleration readiness points are the last 10 points. Those equal 100% or 100 points. And what we'd like to do is just go over what was publicly released that first week of November. I'll pause a minute on this slide. There's a bit of information here. This is how all 15 sites in Litchfield were rated. You can see that first column there, percent tested. The points for proficiency in that calculation for each of the sites. Again, that's out of a total possible 30 points. Points for growth out of a possible 50. Points for English learner, possible 10. The acceleration readiness points out of possible 10. And bonus points, there's a total possible 5 bonus points. Up to 2 points for the percent of students categorized as students with disabilities at a site, and up to 3 bonus points for science proficiency. And you can see total points, the total scale, and then the percent of total points. That does get reported at the state level because not all schools are evaluated on a 100-point scale in the state. Then you can look down at the bottom to see what the cut points are for the letter grades that the schools were given by the state. And then next to that, what we wanted to look at, this is not published by the state. This is something that we calculated ourselves based on what the state plans to do for LEA determinations for next year. This is for the fall of 2023. It's been board approved that they will go with a straight GPA calculation. A is 4 points, B3, C2, D1. So if the state had given Litchfield District a determination this year, that GPA would have calculated out to a 3.73. I don't know if that would have been an A. I don't know what the cut points will be, but in the next slide, when we move on, you can see sort of where it ranks with other districts. There we go. Apologize for the delay. If we looked at non-charter LEAs and LEAs that would have been evaluated if this had been in place this year, that had more than one site, Litchfield, as you can see, would be the 5th highest GPA. Benson with 2 sites that were evaluated, Tankerverde with 3, Kennelly Foothills with 6, Vale with 12 sites, Litchfield with 15. And again, this was not calculated by the state, and it has not been published. This is something we've done internally. And I'd like to highlight some other celebrations. If you look at Verado Elementary Schools, 98.5 points. That's the 7th highest point total in the state when you look at non-charter schools evaluated on a 100-point scale. 9 of the 15 schools received all 10 possible English learner points. 11 of 15 received bonus points for science proficiency. That's either 1.5 points or 3 points, which is at or above the state average. 4 of 6 schools decreased grade 8 math minimally proficient, which counts for points. 8 of 11 decreased grade 3 ELA minimally proficient, which also counts for points. All 15 sites received the maximum points for subgroup proficiency improvement. And then lastly, I wanted to highlight Rancho Santa Fe and Western Sky both received maximum growth points of 50.
I will open the floor to any board member questions.
I have just one question. Can you explain to me how the ELL points are distributed? I mean, it seems like the majority, as you had mentioned, we got all of the points, but is there a cutoff in terms of growth or something, and then the points are determined that way, or how do they determine that?
Kind of, it's in 2 points. So there's 5 points for the proficiency rate. So the percent of EL students that score proficient on the Azella, that's compared to the state average. So points are given relative to where the site is based on state average, close to, at, or above. And then the other 5 points are given on growth on the Azella test, the English proficiency test. So students are given credit for moving 1 proficiency categories or 2 proficiency categories or 3.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, and this may be answered by Superintendent Gunning or Dr. Doozy, depending on who would like to answer this. You know, when I look at the chart on slide 5, which is all of the letter grades, which is what you have up here, you know, one of these things is not like the others, which is L. Thomas Heck. So, you know, each of the scores is significantly lower, whether it's proficiency growth, ELL, readiness, et cetera. What is our plan to help them and support them this year?
Hi, Madam President, governing board members. Yes, so several action steps have been put into place, including analyzing this data with each of the principals, including the principal at Thomas Heck, working with them to identify the subgroup data so that we can target interventions and take strategic action steps. This is also aligned to each principal's scorecard where they each have identified, including the principal at the middle school, specific student achievement goals as far as increasing that proficiency score overall by moving minimally proficient to partially proficient to proficient, and proficient to highly proficient, as well as looking at that subgroup data, special education, EL, and specifically 8th grade math will also get additional bonus points. And 8th grade science as well is another area that specifically middle schools can earn those extra points to change their overall rating. As well as working with strengthening the PLC process. And this isn't just the middle school alone, but across the district. And the PLC process is really focused on learning and focused on collaboration to reach higher learning goals, and really focusing on the results that we have with students. So using common formative assessments, which are the assessments that teachers create to track the changes over time so that we don't wait till the very end, right? We're looking at student data as they're learning, and we're responding to those students that are not. Specifically, L. Thomas Heck has a PLC process in place weekly, as well as intervention time built in their schedule. So that's something that definitely is a PLC focus to help identify and respond to the students that are not performing on the common formative assessments.
um, along with the other schools as well and L. Thomas Heck, we will also be looking at benchmark data. And we will also be looking at the trends of what that tells us. And we just finished iReady diagnostic, so we'll be able to look at that and see student growth, because we do have several structures in place at many of our campuses, but specific to L. Thomas Heck, we have our math specialists that have been working with students. So really seeing the impact that that's having. In addition, we've deployed some additional district personnel. As you all know, board members, and that we've had some turnover specific to L. Thomas Heck. And so using our resources at the district level, I'll be spending time over the next couple weeks, as much as I can. I'll be in classrooms helping support the teachers there and the hard work that they are doing and the commitment they've made to the kids at the middle school, as well as Laura Combs has been there working. John Scudder has been there working as well. So we're really trying to deploy efforts from a district leadership perspective to really provide the support for staff to feel successful with the students and be successful with the students in the midst of losing some teachers in the classroom. So.
Okay, I, as a board member, understood a lot of what you meant by that.
Okay.
But let's say I'm a parent
Okay.
at L. Thomas Heck and I see this information and I say, what are you doing to help my school? What are you doing to help my student? What does that look like?
So I would say for parents at L. Thomas Heck to know that we're focused on what's going on in the classroom. So what the kids are learning. So we're clearly defining what do we want the students to learn and how do we know they learned it? And if they didn't learn it, what are we doing if they don't learn it? And what are we doing if they do learn it as far as enriching and challenging them? That is the PLC process that we are challenged and committed to complete. So that's how I would define it to parents, is to know that we're clearly defining what it is we're looking for in the student learning. We're focused on results. And if we aren't getting those results, we're responding by providing kids what they need.
And have we clearly and concisely communicated that with parents of Heck students?
I don't think we have. So that's a good point. Yeah, I think that's an important communication tool.
Yeah, because I think, you know, what you alluded to, which we're going to talk about later in the agenda, which is some teacher turnover there, combined with this letter grade. If I'm a parent at L. Thomas Heck, I'm wondering what is happening on my campus, and should I be looking at a different campus, you know, that we might have room at? You know, is there something irreparable that's happening at that campus? So I think being upfront and honest about, yeah, you know, we're not in the best place that we could be, but here's what we're doing about that to calm those fears and make sure that they know that we're aware and that these are the steps that we're taking, you know, to show improvement and make changes there, I think would be really great to help those parents feel better about what's happening right now.
Absolutely. So I think that is a great recommendation. And I'll definitely be sharing that with Mrs. Rosenthal. I believe she's here. So I know she's made some efforts through her site council, but probably not at the global messaging that you're conveying tonight. So I think that's a very good point and recommendation.
Okay. And thank you, Mrs. Rosenthal. I know that you have been putting all of your efforts forward with L. Thomas Heck as a new principal that offers its own challenges, and hopefully with more time you can have a more collaborative team and get more create your own culture there that is successful. And if there's any way that the board can support you, feel free to reach out directly, or of course, go through the administrative channels if there's any programs that you can think of or any ideas that your staff might have, ways that we can support you from a resource or staffing perspective. We're always open to that. You're welcome.
Yeah, that was actually a question that I had just before we move on. Is there anything at a district level that we can be doing to provide additional staffing supports? I mean, obviously the turnover is an issue. We can't hire people immediately, or we would have already done that. So that's going to take a little bit of a process. But, you know, instructional assistants, other people that we can deploy. I know we have, you know, some contracted guest teachers on other campuses. I mean, are there things that we can do to help in the interim until we can get that, accomplished. And I know human resources is just tricky mid-year. So I know I'm asking for a lot, but I mean, if there's
No.
resources that we can deploy and budget that needs to be rearranged, let's do that to help them with what they need, because turnover is extremely challenging mid-year.
So one of the things that we did just recently was add additional teachers to the 7th grade team to help in supporting and lowering those class sizes. So that's 2 teachers that we've added in that grade level. We also spoke to all the other principals that if your contract teacher is not being used on that any given day, to please send them over to L. Thomas Heck to support in substituting as needed or in assisting with any needs. We meet on a regular basis to kind of see our progress with the plan that we have made, and then to see if there's any other ideas and suggestions that we may have. So there very well could be some things that we bring back to you in January to implement specifically for that campus from a approval from a budget perspective piece, because we want to definitely make sure that we're providing all of the supports possible.
I think the good news here is that we have figured out a recipe for success. I mean, I think, the letter grades and our GPA scores and our proficiency and growth, while we always want to do better, is moving in the right direction. As a district, our numbers look fantastic. And I think, when like Ms. Moran said, when one doesn't look like the other, it says, okay, how do we wrap our arms around that one campus and figure out what's going on, because we've clearly figured it out somewhere else. And so let's use those, whatever best practices we have to help that campus reach their potential, because we've seen it before. We know they can do it again. Thank you.
Any other board member comments or questions? Then I will just end by saying, don't get my commentary wrong. I am overjoyed with these results overall. They're amazing. I mean, it is astounding, actually, how well we did coming off the pandemic, comparing with not just our peers, but all of the districts in Arizona. We deserve to be commended. And I said November was going to be my month to celebrate these letter grades, but I'm going to keep on celebrating because they're pretty awesome. So congratulations to all the teachers and the principals and the administrators. Keep up the good work. We appreciate you. Thank you, Director Owen. We will now move on to agenda item 4, which is community opportunity for comment, and specifically the acknowledgement of public requests to speak. I will read the disclaimer. Pursuant to ARS 38-431.01H, this agenda item provides an open call to the public, allowing individuals to address the governing board on any issue within the jurisdiction of the board. Items not listed on the agenda may be brought to the governing board's attention under this section of the agenda. Due to the Arizona open meeting law, the governing board cannot discuss or take any action on items not listed on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to ARS 38-431.01H, response to public comment about matters not appearing on the agenda will be limited to individual board members who may ask staff to study the matter, respond to any criticism, or ask that the matter be put on a future agenda for further consideration and decision at a later date. Please limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes, and no more than 30 minutes will be devoted to the public comment portion of the agenda. When you approach the podium, please state your name for the record. This evening, we have one public participant, Mr. Finnegan.
Hello, everyone. Mike Finnegan. Every year, the academic scores come in and disappoint in LASD. Tonight, you're all ecstatic and happy about these results of academics, which has a 50% growth rate and coming out of a COVID pandemic. You've worked so hard for so long and would love to shout the gap is closing, our efforts are working, but you can't say that because your efforts are not working. Tonight's school academic results are not real progress. They are recovery from the largest unprecedented learning loss created by teachers' unions' self-interest at the expense of public education and its students. Let's keep it real. They stopped doing letter grades because of COVID, because it was so bad. They didn't want to look bad. Now we're back, and now we're going to measure all these fantastic growth results. Well, you're coming back to where you were. You've still got a long way to go. If you have students who don't meet the academic standards, you will have teachers who don't meet the academic standards. And you have to create courses that don't meet the academic standards. Maybe that's what you guys are doing. I would start looking at some teachers for these poor results also, because the subject matter is not getting across. If I was a parent and my student was in the L. Thomas Heck School, I would think of that building as being on fire. And if I really had concern and interest in my students' education and future potential, I would run into that burning building and pull my children out of that building and save their academic career and take the state's $8,000 state voucher and find some competition, charter schools, Christian schools, whatever, that are already producing the results that you guys are still trying to figure out. And while you're in Las Vegas for the Leader in Me for a week conference, how are you going to keep a pulse on L. Thomas Heck School? This is serious business. This school is burning down, and these kids need to be saved.
We will now move on to agenda item 5A, which is motion to approve consent agenda items. Before I entertain a motion, I will ask if there are any board members who would like to remove any items from the consent agenda. Dr. Dowling, do you have any items you would like to remove from the consent agenda?
Since this is my last board meeting, I think Michael and everybody would be very disappointed if I didn't have any questions, but I don't.
Oh, okay. Board Member Clymer.
Yes, I know we talked about it briefly, but I'd like to pull off item 6H, which is the certified resignations and release of contracts.
Board Member Zidema.
Nothing to pull.
I also was going to pull off item 6H, so we will pull that item, remove that from the consent agenda. Do any board members have questions on the remaining items on the consent agenda?
No, can I make a motion now?
Yes, you may.
I motion to approve the consent agenda minus 6H as presented.
I will second. Having a first and a second, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We will now address the item that was removed from the consent agenda, which is agenda item 6H, certified personnel resignation, release of contract, retirement, non-renewals. Board Member Clymer.
As I mentioned, we just talked about this briefly because all four of the five come from one campus and really are just over a 1-month time period. So I just, I mean, we've talked about the struggles that we've had with, teachers and asking for release of contract. I know some of these are medical circumstances and those set aside. Specifically in terms of staffing, I know we talked about some of the academic areas. how are we addressing this? And what can we do in the short term? I know that there's some long-term plans, I'm assuming with HR to get these positions filled, but what are we doing in the short term? Because it looks to me like there's only one of these 4 positions that are actually still at the school. Everyone else has already gone within the last couple of weeks. So clearly the problem is already in front of us. So what are we doing to address these open positions?
So we're working with a contract company to, like we have done in the past in regards to special education, but also working with a contract company to fill some of these positions as soon as possible. We have one person, I believe, that's going to be starting tomorrow, I believe is the last update. And then we've put additional orders in for the other positions as well. And then our HR generalist has continued to work with all the universities and making contact with all of their recent grads, notifying them of our openings as well.
I believe later in the agenda, we will talk about the ESSER funding, and there is a standing comment that's been there for a while to potentially talk about stipends for hard to fill positions. Is that something that we are considering? And if so, when would that come to the board?
That's something that we absolutely are considering, specifically putting into place for L. Thomas Heck this year. So our hopes is to be able to bring that to the governing board in January. And with the potential of a plan, we're still working on finalizing the plan, but potentially of 2 payout times.
So similar to kind of like pandemic retention that we did.
Very similar.
Okay.
And then we'll be working on, in addition to that, on long-term ongoing stipends for hard to fill positions, as well as some Title I stipends.
And that was something that we already were in discussions for starting 23-24 school year, but we're talking specifically at L. Thomas Heck. We will potentially see something in our January meeting to get that going right away to help and aid that particular campus.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
One other question, I apologize, that I forgot to ask earlier is, I think it goes specifically to this. I think obviously the academics and parent communication, all of those things are extremely important. One thing I don't want us to lose sight of, and I'm not suggesting that you have, but it didn't strike me until right this minute. What can we be doing to support the staff that is here, that is, their culture is being disrupted? We're talking about them individually at board meetings. I mean, that is not necessarily attention that most people like to have. So how can we support the staff and the administrators there to say, we know this is hard, we're doing all that we can, because that's on top of everything else. We certainly don't want a culture problem. And I hope that that hasn't started, but if it has, we need to be able to support them from a HR perspective and make sure we're giving them what they need to retain the employees that they currently have.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think there's a lot of different things going on simultaneously to help support, as well as supporting the staff as a whole. Not only deploying and housing people out of that campus to be able to just have that extra support of people, but also just even as simple as like events or lunches, or just making sure, and from a governing board perspective, I think thank yous and those types of things, just noticing and offering words of support, I think would be very helpful.
Do they have a parent support group at that campus?
They do have a PTA. And I think that they have planned some events coming up, or something next week, I believe. So the admin team has a holiday event planned.
Hi, I'm Sarah Rosenthal. I'm the principal at L. Thomas Heck. We do have some events planned for our teachers next week, little fun things just leading up to the break, as usually the week before break is quite challenging. So we've got all of those things planned. We also have a fabulous PTO that is also involved in our school as well.
Any other board member questions on this agenda item? Then I will move to approve agenda item 6H as presented.
A second.
Having the first and the second, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We will now move on to the action discussion agenda items section. And we will begin that section with item 7A, approval to open request for proposal, also known as an RFP for science curriculum adoption. And this will be presented by Director Combs.
Good evening, Madam President and governing board members. I am here tonight to request the opening of a request for proposal for a new science adoption to begin and implemented in the school year 23-24. And I'm here to take any questions that you might have.
I have a few questions. My first question is, does the timeline allow adequate implementation with fidelity for the phase one, which would happen in the 23-24 school year?
So the 23-24 school year would only be 6th through 8th grade science teachers. So it affects approximately 27 teachers in our district. I did survey them to see if they would be ready and willing to jump into that. They are, at this moment, they do not have an adopted curriculum at all. They're creating all the lessons on their own, trying to find resources from many different areas. They work amazingly as a team, but being able to provide them with the guidance of an adopted curriculum would be incredibly helpful for them and really save them time in planning so that they could then spend that on really getting deep into their teaching of that. So when I did survey them, 65% of them wanted to begin it next year, with the other 34%, 36% wanting to get it for next year, but kind of just play around with it for a year. And so they still wanted it for next year. They just, and we will phase in what the expectation would be throughout the year as well.
Okay,
Does
thank
that
you.
answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, the reason that I asked the question is because we're saying we're not going to be ready for the board to even approve the curriculum adoption until June. And then obviously we started school in August. So I wanted to make sure there was adequate time in that July timeframe for any training that would need to happen in order to kick off day one with the actual curriculum being in place. So let me clarify, if we adopt this, let's say as a board, if we adopt this in June, it will not be optional to implement, correct? The middle schools would all implement this beginning in August of 2023.
It would not be optional to begin implementing it, but again, we would phase that in. So that first quarter is probably going to be training and learning the curriculum. So everybody might be at a different level of implementation, with that second quarter being really ready to move through it.
Okay.
It will be
Is
tight. No kidding. It will be tight.
Okay, is that how that's not how we normally do. I mean, we didn't phase in iReady, right? Like we did the training and then day one we started iReady.
Right. And I can't for sure say that that's what we would do because we don't know what we're selecting. We don't even know who will put in for our RFP and what the need for, what the implementation for that will be. You know, there are several of our teachers that are already using, I'll take, for example, Discovery Ed is one of the science curriculums that is recommended by many districts. And we have teachers that are already using some of those pieces. So for them, rolling into that may not be as intense, right? It might not be as, their training level may not be as high as somebody else. So it's really going to depend on what we end up selecting. And then,
Okay. So tell me then, when would that training happen? If school has already started, then, I mean, wouldn't it be more advantageous to have the training during the summer, offer some stipends for special training days? Or, I mean, I just don't see how you're going to be managing a classroom and then also learning a curriculum on top of that.
and that's absolutely a possibility that there might be some summer training days, or we may be using those pre-service days as well.
Okay. My other questions are related to the funding and the cost for this. I mean, I know we spent around $1 million on our math curriculum. I have no idea how much a science curriculum costs. So can you give me a ballpark estimate on that?
I'm not sure. Again, it's going to depend on who submits. But I have spoke with Director Vaughn about our funding source, and he assures me that we will be able to do it. And we believe we will probably fund it through the ESSER funds as well.
Okay.
Not guaranteed that that's what we would do, though.
Okay, and that would then come out of the 1 million that's yet to be allocated from the ESSER
Well,
3?
Hold on. So historically, the district has anticipated adopting a science curriculum for several years now. When a capital plan has been brought to the governing board, a science curriculum adoption has been included in there for a couple of years. And so if you look at our unrestricted capital outlay fund, not ESSER, some of that carryover balance that is built up is money that we've set aside for the science adoption. So I'm actually thinking that we'll use just that regular capital money. If initially I was thinking that if we were having excess ESSER money, that this would be something we could use ESSER money for. I'm no longer thinking that with all of the other staff retention and other items that are coming up. I'm thinking it's more likely that it's going to be the regular capital money that we've set aside in the past. However, with how this RFP is being done, ESSER would be an option as a funding source if it were to come to that.
Okay, and that would be in line with the board direction that we wanted all of the ESSER funds to go toward learning loss. And obviously the math curriculum was a piece of that. I think the science curriculum adoption would apply to that as well. So in the RFP, we don't put any sort of dollar amount. We just say, this is what we want, tell us how much it's going to be. I would like some sort of range. Can you give me any range in how much this would cost?
I'm not sure. If I'm honest with you, I asked the same questions and I wasn't able to get an answer. So
fair enough. Fair enough. I will let you off the hook with this. Any other board member questions on this?
I have a couple of questions. In here, you mentioned, I know we've done this before with Wonders and iReady as well, having a curriculum adoption committee where we have teachers, administrators, et cetera, that go through directors, that go through the process of really sort of digging down really deep on a few different options. How is this committee going to work? What is the criteria for being on the committee? I know we have kind of a tight timeline of people applying and going through that process, and then who will lead the committee?
So if approved tonight, I actually will send out the interest survey tomorrow to all staff. And because we are looking at kinder through 8th grade, we want a range of grade level teachers and an administrator on the committee. And so we want representation from across our district on it. And because K-5 teaches science within their content, it's really going to be any K-5 teacher that has an interest. I suspect at the middle school level, the ones that are going to show the most interest will be science content teachers.
Sure. And who's leading the committee and who makes the decisions about who's on it?
So I will be facilitating, and again, I will be looking at across the district, how many we have it represented across our district, how many from each school have put in for interest. If there's a question, it may become principal recommendation as well.
One last question. We mentioned the rollout of 6th through 8th the first year. And then what is the strategy behind splitting our K-5 students? So doing 3 through 5 in year 2 and K-2 the next year. What is the reason for that?
Because they've had quite a few adoptions in the last few years. And so they do have a supplemental material with mystery science that many are using. And truthfully, that may become what they want to keep as well, because it does meet many of our requirements for it. And so that's why we want to also provide them with the kit material so that if they are using that, they have those resources readily available to them. They don't have to go find them. They don't have to, use their site budgets to purchase them, that those are already provided to them. It really is because, like 3-5 has had a curriculum or rolled out on them towards them every year for several years. So
That makes sense. Tell me more about, you just said some of them may choose to keep mystery science. So how does that work if we're adopting a curriculum as a district?
So
How does that work?
when our committee meets, those will be discussions. Do we only want to look at curriculums that are geared towards K through 8? Or do we want to say, it's okay if we have a different curriculum for 6, 8, and 5, K-5 is
Okay, I
different?
understand now. Okay.
Truthfully, most of the curriculums that are out there are separated. They aren't a K-8. There's only a couple companies that even do K-8 or K-12 all the way through.
Okay, I apologize. I thought you meant they may keep mystery science while we adopt a separate curriculum. You just meant they may choose to adopt mystery science or something like that for their curriculum. I understand. Sorry, I was
Yes.
confused. Thank you. That was all my questions.
I've got a couple of questions. First one would be, these standards were adopted in 2018. That's 5 years ago. Why haven't we done anything before now?
What we have done is we've created standards maps, a pacing map, and using those supplemental materials, we've connected lessons to those. So that's what we have been doing in the past. It just is, every summer we spend time with a small team creating those for our teachers. They're all in different places. They all require a little bit different this or that. So giving them that consistency of a progression of learning would be very helpful.
Okay, my next question would be, if I'm in the 8th grade at Western Sky, and I'm taking it, tell me what the 8th grade, what's the title of the 8th grade? Is it biology? Is something that integrated science? Do you have a name for it?
Just
Eighth-
science.
Just
Just
grade
science.
science.
Mhm.
So if I'm at Western Sky and in October, I move to Tom Heck, am I going to be able to was this a seamless transition, picking up the curriculum where I was to where I am at Thomas Heck?
Are you talking about what we're currently using?
Yes, yes.
That would be the hope, because we do have those standards map attached to lessons that all of our 6-8 are using.
Okay. I would hope so. It would be a disservice, definitely to that student, not to be able to move, almost parallel.
Right,
Like they
that-
would in math or English language arts. And second,
Exactly.
third question, I guess, is I'm a retired educator. Of course, I wasn't a science teacher. When we talk about these new standards give more attention to science as a dynamic, creative, corroborative process rather than learning science as a collection of facts. Can you tell me what that means?
The new science standards are really based on the phenomena that happens in our world. So why something happens instead of just a collection of information. Whereas with the scientific method, it was really make a prediction and then test it out. Whereas
Okay.
now we're saying we have experiments that happen all the way or all the time around us. Why is that happening? Oop, did I just do that?
It's more of a real world experience.
Exactly. And it's really
beyond the
connected.
classroom, and you can relate it to, come back and relate it to what we're trying to teach. Now, the next question is, are there other school districts, elementary school districts or unified school district, doesn't make any difference, who have adopted a science program for their 6th through 8th grade? It seems to be working for them.
Yes and no. Sometimes it's piecemealed. 6-8 is the big hard one right now.
Absolutely.
And there haven't been a lot of curriculums that have even gone through the process of being tested and gone through the ed report where they check for many different indicators of a quality curriculum. And there aren't many that have passed it that have gone through it. So in my opinion, I think we have also waited because there wasn't something out there that was going to meet our needs. And truthfully, we're not sure any of the curriculums will completely meet our needs because our Arizona standards are a little bit different than what many, many, many other states have adopted.
That could be an issue.
Right.
And the last question I have, based on what your answer is, have we talked at any articulation with the high school district to see what they're using, and they would recommend use this, it'll be a seamless transition as we go into their 9th grade math, integrated math or biology, or whatever those students go into, to prepare them at our level to where there's some confidence and capability to be successful.
Can you answer which curriculum? Agua Fria does not have an adopted curriculum for science.
Okay.
For their different, because they offer biology and life science and yeah.
Absolutely. Chemistry. Okay.
I have one final question, which is, we have previously had a conversation regarding human growth and development, and that conversation ended with perhaps being able to find a science curriculum program that would incorporate that. Is that going to be part of the selection criteria when the committee meets potentially and selects this curriculum?
So that is something that we've had a discussion about as a possible addition to our RFP scope and scope of the work. And I think we've come to the conclusion that we are going to write it as preferred, but not as a complete requirement. That may knock everyone out if we put it as, this is an absolute requirement for us.
Okay, but that still is on the radar screen for this
Yes.
committee. Okay, that's really what I was trying to.
Yes, it
Hopefully we can
is.
incorporate all that together and make all of our lives a little easier. So, okay. Any other board member questions or comments on the RFP?
Just one last comment. I think I certainly don't want you to take our questioning as unsupportive, because I think, as you mentioned, we've been lucky enough to roll out some pretty serious curriculum adoptions over the last several years. So while we just certainly don't want to overwhelm teachers with more curriculum to learn, I think we're in a really, really great spot to be able to offer this to teachers and to help our students. So we're questioning it because we're interested and we want to see this succeed. Most definitely. We know this is a tight time frame, but I'm hopeful that this will be successful and we'll get the responses that you're looking for, even though this seems to be a tricky age group, because right now, while we have hopefully the funding that we need and the desire from our teachers to go through yet another adoption. Let's do it because it's been too long since we've had anything in place. So
I appreciate you saying that because for our 6-8 teachers, they've been asking for this for many years. And it'll be a wonderful opportunity for them to have something that's substantial for them that meets these new standards as well.
Any other board member questions or comments? Then I will move to approve to open a request for proposal for the science curriculum adoption as presented.
I second.
Having a first and a second, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Director Gomes. We will now move on to agenda item 7B, discussion and approval of fiscal year 2023 expenditure budget revised number 2, which will be presented by Executive Director Vaughn.
Madam President, members of the governing board, Superintendent Gunning, colleagues and community, thank you for joining me tonight to discuss the district's second budget revision for fiscal year 2023. Tonight's presentation aligns with the district's strategic plan to increase stakeholder knowledge and understanding of school finance and funding. State statute requires that districts revise their budget by December 15th in certain situations. While the district was not required to revise this December, it's customary for the district to update its budget each December. As a reminder, the maintenance and operation budget is set by a statutory formula, which considers average daily membership, as well as weighted student count. The formula is driven largely by weighted student count, or the number of full-time equivalent students served by the district, weighted by the students' characteristics, such as special education, to determine how much funding is made available to the district. For this budget revision, average daily membership estimates were revised down by 31 students, but weighted student count were revised up. This is largely due to weights for free and reduced lunch students and gifted students that the states added to the funding formula over the past years. On this slide, you can see a comparison of the budget available in M&O and its various sources compared to the first revised budget. The revenue control limit is the funding provided from the funding formula I described on the previous slide. It's the ongoing funding generated to support the district's students. The increased revenue control limit is being driven by the change in weighted student count we just discussed. The change in carryover was caused both by the state's recalculation of the district's exact M&O budget from last year and expenditures not coming to fruition as initially thought on the last budget revision. However, we will discuss in the presentation later tonight how our reserves compare to the levels that we've previously agreed upon as prudent for the district's financial management. On this budget revision, we've added budget capacity to special education portion of the budget, primarily in the area of contracted staffing. This is also why you see a small decline in the percentage of our budget that is for salaries and benefits. We're seeing an increased reliance on contracted staff as we continue through the year, especially in the area of special education. And as a reminder, 72.4% of the district's M&O budget are in areas that directly support the classroom. The unrestricted capital outlay fund supports construction, remodels of facilities, equipment, textbooks, and other items that will last the district longer than a year. Similar to M&O, unrestricted capital outlay resources are provided to the district via a statutory formula that considers average daily membership or full-time equivalent students served by the district and a funding amount per student. Unrestricted capital outlay considers a prior year student count when determining funding, unlike M&O, which considers current year membership. Each year, the state reevaluates and recalculates membership statewide in September. And so in this budget revision, we're updating to the state's final figures for last year's enrollment. Here you can see a comparison of the unrestricted capital outlay budget limit in this budget revision compared to the previous budget revision. Most of the increase in funds is being caused by the change in student count caused by the statewide recalculation. The unrestricted capital outlay budget is primarily budgeted for facilities work, furniture, equipment, and vehicles, as well as instructional materials. At this time, I'm available to answer any questions you may have on the district's second budget revision for fiscal year 2023.
I have one question and one request. My question is on slide 9. The 1.1 million for textbooks, library books, and instructional materials, that is the pot, if you will, that you were referring to earlier when we talked about the science curriculum adoption and where that money would come from.
Really, all the money in the unrestricted capital outlay fund would be available. If it ended up being more than that, we would simply revise the budget to shift funding between those categories, very similar to how on the M&O slide, you saw that we shifted budget from salaries and benefits to the contracted services area of the budget.
Okay, thank you. On slide 6, which is where that information, salaries and benefits, utilities, and other, is it possible to break that other category out? Because when you say that, we're shifting from salaries and benefits to other, my first question is, well, why would we be taking money out of salaries and benefits? But when you give the explanation, which is that we're using more contractors, and so that falls under other, is it possible to break out other to say contract
Certainly.
employees and other? Because I feel like knowing that we're still spending the same amount of money, but we're having to spend it as contractors versus full-time employees indicates something different than just shifting it to something altogether in a different category.
Certainly, I can break that out in future budget presentation.
Okay, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Of course.
Any other board member questions? Then I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the revised budget as presented.
I second.
Having a first and a second, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Executive Director Vaughn.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is item 7C, approval of governing board meeting date of January 10th, 2023. This will be presented by Superintendent Gunning.
Madam President, members of the governing board, we would propose that we approve to schedule our organizational meeting and regular meeting on January 10th. At that time, then we'll approve the remainder of the meetings from January through December. And typically we usually have at least 2 meetings a month, but if there was special circumstances, we may add more.
Thank you. This is going to require some discussion by the board members. So as you are likely aware, January 10th is the first Tuesday that we are back from the holiday break. So it is going to prove to be a challenge for those who are taking time off to be able to provide information for that meeting. We are required to have our organizational meeting before the 15th of January. So what I would propose, and I'm open to options on this, is that we keep a special meeting that would include the organizational meeting. I'm not sure exactly how that needs to be divvied up, but basically have a special meeting on the 10th, and we could include whatever information that we needed to in that special meeting, but also have that be a partial study session to further discuss specifically the job descriptions that we're going to talk about later in the agenda tonight. But I think we're going to need more of a study session atmosphere or time frame in order to really look through those job descriptions and provide the specific feedback to perfect that or get it as close as we can before we move to the next step in that. I don't know that we're really ready tonight to have an in-depth conversation on the nitty-gritties of that. So then if we have basically a special meeting that includes the organizational meeting as well as a study session to make sure that we are continuing this process toward the superintendent search on January 10th, we could have our regular meeting, if you will, on that next Tuesday, which is, let me get my calendar out here,
The 17th.
on the 17th. Or we could have our regular meeting on the 24th. I do want us to, and we don't know what the calendar is yet, but normally we have a regular meeting and a study session. I do not want the January 10th study session to replace the study session later in January, because as you likely recall, we have a lot on our plate regarding the budget, the compensation study, things like that. And I don't want us to miss out on that. So in a nutshell, what I'm proposing is we have 3 meetings in January. The first meeting to contain the organizational meeting, which must happen by the 15th, as well as to keep the superintendent search on track, and then have a regular meeting either the 17th or the 24th, and then have our study session on the 31st. Can I get your thoughts on that, Dr. Dowling? I think you're off the hook with this one, but Board Member Clymer or Board Member Zeidema?
That works for me. I mean, I do agree that, I know we haven't discussed the superintendent job search yet on this agenda, but I do agree that we'll probably have some further discussion on what it will transpire, not only in the job descriptions, but also selecting a search firm. So I don't mind having an update on the 10th and allowing us to have our organizational meeting and then pushing our regular meeting to the 17th. I don't have any issue with that.
I want feedback from the district on that, because that's a lot of meetings for you guys also to prepare for us. And I agree, we have a lot of things we have to do, and we're probably going to be meeting a ton over the next several months. And in addition to that, I don't know if we're allowed, but I think maybe we should also get feedback from Mr. Owens, since this will impact him as well.
Well, it does take a lot of prep time to prepare for these meetings, and we tend to have them every 2 weeks. So I think, I mean, I appreciate you asking, because I think that's where the board has to discuss where's the priority of the use of your district leadership. Because that would be a lot back to back.
Okay, I'm confused. It seems like we have sort of like battling priorities here, because President Moran just said we're potentially pushing it back to the 17th because the district, there will people be on vacation or taking time over the holidays. So we're trying to help them by pushing the meeting back to the 17th, because they wouldn't be able to prepare the week prior to that as we normally would. So if we do that, we still have to have the meeting on the 10th for the organizational meeting, because it's just required by statute that we have to. So it seems like we're either helping ourselves by pushing it back, or we're hurting ourselves by pushing it back. So I'm not sure that we're going to solve that problem.
I think by having 3 meetings, I think that's the topic to discuss. Do we need to have the study session? And maybe we do, and I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it would depend on how much we can accomplish maybe in the regular meeting as far as presentations in regards to budget. And maybe that's kind of a thing that we slot it and see if it's absolutely needed, and we cancel it if we don't need it.
The one on the 31st,
Right.
the proposal on the 31st.
And are there any, and I think at that time too, as we, with the board president or whoever is the board president at that time, we can also look at all of the requests for presentations and see if there's things that could be reorganized too.
Okay.
So I guess it would be also that, because you'll be voting on that at the organizational meeting. I mean,
I was going to ask, the meeting schedule is done at the organizational meeting or the regular meeting? Organizational meeting. Nodding, okay.
Okay, I'm not sure that we're going to know more on the 10th than we know now about the topics that need to be discussed, but we can certainly kick that can down the road. One thing to note on the calendar is there was a request that we have consistent meeting times. I'd like to see that reflected on the proposed calendar for adoption if we're discussing that on the 10th. And yeah, I mean, we have a lot of work to do. No one up here is saying that we don't, but delaying it to February, delaying it to March is only going to bite us later. And we've had that happen before where we end up not being able to make decisions, informed decisions in a timely manner, and we end up getting pushed up against a wall when it comes to budget discussions. I want us to be able to have time, especially with some of these budget discussions related to benefits and things like that. I want us to have time to get staff feedback and be able to consider that and not have to make a decision that we're not fully informed and fully aware of. And that's going to require more conversations, and that's going to require more time, not only administrator time, but the board's time. But if we want to get this right, I think that's what needs to happen, because even if we said we wanted our regular meeting on the 10th, that's not going to be a productive full meeting, and there's going to be items that will need to be discussed again. So although that's not ideal, I think this is a one-time situation based on the timing of the break. We already know the calendar for next year will not fall the same way that the calendar for this year does, as far as the holiday break goes.
I would suggest we keep it on the calendar, and if necessary, we can readdress it on the 10th and decide if we need it. I think we could probably say right now what should be on the agenda of that. I think we have plenty of documentation in terms of what we had planned for various study sessions and whatnot, knowing that we have the spring budget cycle coming up. So I would suggest we leave it on there, and then we can readdress it on the 10th when we're voting and during the organizational meeting if we wanted to remove it.
Board Member Zeidema, do you have any feedback on that?
I think that's fine. I still think we need to ask Mr. Owens if all that works for him too.
Thumbs
We'll
up. We'll take
thumbs
that
up
as a
from
good to go.
Mr.
Okay.
From Mr. Owens. He doesn't want to complain about anything yet. He has, doesn't want to get off on the wrong foot with that. So
We'll just say every Tuesday night from now until for the next 4 years, just plan on being here. And if you don't have to be here, that's fantastic. If you do, then we'll just suggest Tuesday nights are now off limits.
Okay, so what you're recommending then, just so I understand, is that we will have our organizational meeting and special meeting or study session on the 10th.
I believe it has to be a special meeting in order to do the organizational meeting, which is why I say that.
No, organizational meeting is separate, right?
Organizational meeting and study session. Right, but we are asking for a study
But we want
session
a
on the
study
10th.
session also. Okay, on the same day though. So basically we want to have the organizational meeting and a study session on the 10th to discuss the superintendent stuff. But no decisions will be made then, correct? On the superintendent stuff.
Correct, that would be, and then we would bring that to the next meeting, which would be either the 17th or the 24th, depending on what we approve. So how are we going to approve? So in the organizational meeting, we nominate and vote for a president, and we also approve the governing board meeting calendar. What else happens in the organizational meeting? Okay, but those are the only agenda items.
There's a bunch of businessy stuff we approve. It's a lot of things. I know
Okay.
it's a big long list, but it's not a lot of discussion so much. And don't we also pick like our
Okay, thank you. And to the best of your knowledge, we won't have any personnel issues or anything we would need to approve on the 10th. So you're saying we do not need to have a special meeting?
So what I would recommend is that we figure out which items that we want for presentations, still leave it as a special meeting rather than calling it a study session, so that if we do have any hires, that we could bring it at that time, especially if we have any teacher hires that we would like to get done.
Okay, I agree. So in summary, I move to approve the governing board meeting date of January 10th, 2023 for the organizational meeting and a special meeting on that date.
I second.
Having a first and a second, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
To clarify though, then we will establish our meeting that's going to be the next week at our organizational meeting. We don't have to decide, we don't have to, okay, just making sure.
Our next item is item 7D, discussion and approval of priorities to be included in the procurement of a search firm for the superintendent search. This item is to be presented by Executive Director Vaughn.
Madam President, members of the governing board, Superintendent Gunning, colleagues and community, thank you for joining me tonight to discuss procurement for a search firm related to the district's next superintendent. Following the district's previous board meeting, the district's procurement department worked to identify the methods other school districts have used to procure superintendent search services. No cooperative contracts were identified, and all districts that responded with information share that they had used a request for quotation process. When building procurements such as requests for quotations, districts must communicate to potential vendors how they will be evaluated under the procurement. And many of these districts included board priorities as evaluation criteria for the search firm. Tonight, we have provided some potential examples of what these criteria may be for Litchfield search firm request for quotation, and invite board discussion and approval of board priorities that should be included in the evaluation criteria for the firms. I will just briefly read off the potential examples that have been drafted. 1, please describe the search firm's experience in recruiting candidates with extensive experience in improving academic achievement of a school district of Litchfield's size and complexity. 2, please describe the search firm's experience in recruiting candidates with extensive experience leading districts of a similar size to Litchfield Elementary School District. 3, please describe the search firm's experience in recruiting candidates with extensive experience in leading elementary school districts. And 4, please describe the search firm's experience in working with communities with similar student demographics as our district. I'll now open it up for board discussion.
Okay, so I have never written an RFQ. I'm going to assume no one else up here has written an RFQ. So I'm not exactly clear on what you're asking us for, to be completely transparent.
Okay, let me try again. So when you release any procurement document, let's just ignore terms for a second. You basically have to communicate to the people who respond to it how you're going to evaluate them. And when we looked at several examples of other school districts, they had language similar to, but not the same as these, where it was very clear that the board was looking for, that the other school district's board, not this board to be clear, was looking for certain experience for that search firm. Because if we don't include it in the evaluation criteria, we can't use it to evaluate the search firm. So if we want a search firm for our search that has experience recruiting certain types of candidates, then we need to identify what that is so that we can include it in the procurement documents. If there isn't any particular types of experience that we want to be able to screen for, that's okay too. But we just wanted to provide the board an opportunity to have some discussion around that option. Does that make more sense?
Yes, it does.
I have one suggestion.
Yeah,
To get us
please.
started. Again, I'm not sure that might not be part of the evaluation criteria that we would use, but it might still be a priority of the board. So I'm not sure that I would add it to this list in the way that you just described it. So thank you for clarifying that. But one thing I think is important, because this board hasn't used a firm like this in the past, and those of us that are on the board will be new to this process. I think one priority for me is that we hire a firm that has a transparent approach, that is going to work with us as a board and be collaborative and open to how this process works, how their internal process works, and communicating with us every step of the way, as I'm sure we will have questions as we do with everything else. Again, I don't know how we would evaluate them on that unless they provided examples of that with other searches that they've done. And I don't know about confidentiality, if that would be appropriate. But I do think a priority of mine is making sure that we have a firm that wants to be transparent in their process, their internal dealings, and communicating with us and trying to collaborate on that process.
Okay, I do also, Executive Director Vaughn, have the document that I believe you provided in our Friday update that has multiple areas to consider, 14 different potential areas to consider for evaluation criteria. The 4 that are listed in the agenda are examples strictly, or they're your recommendations, or?
Several members of the administrative team came together to brainstorm potential examples. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're recommendations. I do think some of them are good ideas. For example, making sure that they have experience recruiting candidates that have dealt with organizations of our size and complexity. I think that's a good idea. But they're not all necessarily recommendations. I just wanted to give some examples to spur discussion. The 14 or so that were shared in the update to the board, those were examples that we saw pretty much included in every procurement of a search firm that we saw. So what we're bringing today or discussing tonight would be an addition to those.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Do all board members have access to that document?
Yes.
Board members Idema, do you have access to that document, or?
I'm pulling it up.
Okay,
yes.
okay. I just want to make sure that we kind of know. So in that, there's some general information like cost. Clearly, that is going to be something we're going to evaluate that firm on. It asks about previous superintendent searches, the success rates for those, if they've had any contracts that they've entered into that have been terminated unfavorably, any litigation they've been involved with. So yeah, to Executive Director Vaughn's point, it sounds like these are kind of the boilerplate, if you will, just things you want to know about a firm. And if we're talking about these additional 4, one thing that I don't know if this is defined in that or not, but like in number 3, when we say, please describe the search firm's experience in recruiting candidates with extensive experience leading elementary school districts, I think we should define elementary as K through 8. I think that other districts across the country define elementary in different ways. They have maybe junior highs or other terminology for grades K through 8. So I'd like to make sure we're specific on that. That would be my only kind of tweak on those 4. Again, I haven't done this before, so I'm really not sure what we are supposed to be asking, to be completely honest.
I have a question. When you were sort of talking about the evaluation of the request itself, so when they submit their response, to President Moran's comment about, if they've been involved in litigation or something like that, while, I mean, that's definitely something we would want to know. I guess I assumed that we would know that and be able to evaluate them based on that. But if you're saying that we can only evaluate them based on these 4 things, there's probably some other like housekeeping kind of items, like, are you in the middle of a giant lawsuit, that we might want to know. And if we can't evaluate them based on that, then yeah, I think we probably need to add some of those items to this. But if you're saying we can still take a look at those things, but not have them on this list, then maybe we don't need to go that route.
I think that's why it was very important to look at several different industry examples to build that list of 14 that we already shared that we would basically be including. But yes, typically, I mean, you always have the option to back out of agreements if something if you become aware of something at a later date where they wouldn't be appropriate to do business with. But those 14 are designed to try to weed out, as well as just the responses that you get. I mean, you typically can tell the quality of a firm, at least to a certain extent, by how well they're responding to the
Sure.
to the request.
And then on that listing of 14, it has points assigned to each one, and that's just part of the evaluation process. So we would assign, and that's transparent to them. They know how many points each is assigned.
Yes, that so the whole listing with the points would be built into the request for quotes. So that would be just as transparent to the people that would be responding to the procurement as the committee that would be scoring the responses we receive.
And then we will provide the firm with our student demographic so they could, answer that question intelligently. Okay. And then the RFQ would go out to all of the firms that were on that same document that was sent in the Friday. Okay. Board Member Clymer, you're the only one of us that has been through this before. Do you have any specific criteria, in addition to these 14 plus the 4 that's coming to your memory at this point?
No, I mean, I think, while I've been through the process of hiring a superintendent, we didn't do it this way at all. It was a very different process. So I'm excited to see how this process plays out. I don't think that when we hired the one consultant that did help us through the process, while she was amazing and I think really helped us get organized and stay organized, that person, not because she wasn't qualified, but because we didn't ask her to fit all of those criteria. So I think it's just very different. I don't see anything off the top of my head. Like I said, I mean, the one thing that is really important to me, and I think because we did so much of it in-house last time, is having a very transparent process, making sure that we know that we can be part of the process as we go along, as we ask questions and want to know the response that they're getting, the reactions they're getting, that kind of stuff. So that was really the only thing that I saw and again, I don't know that it's an evaluation criteria, but just something for us to be paying attention to as we start to prioritize things once a firm is selected.
Dr. Dowling, you've been on the other end, similar as an administrator to this process. Anything else you think we might be missing here?
No, we just have to ensure, as Michael mentioned, that it has to be an open and fair process to avoid any disgruntled bidder from coming back and saying they weren't happy with the process. As long as you have a clear criteria, clear understanding of what you're looking for, clear understanding of the process, the timeline, or they may help us with the timeline. No, I think this is how you start. I would recommend you use a search firm for a district of this quality and size. It's tough to go with just a facilitator to help you. But it looks very reasonable to me.
Thank you. Board members, Idema, do you have any feedback?
Well, this is not my area of expertise, so I'm going to really be relying on our hired experts over there to help us with this process, and also on Danielle, who's gone through this process, although not exactly like this before. I think that it all looks good, what you presented. So I mean, I'm good with what is here. I agree with Danielle about needing to have transparency because we like to ask a lot of questions. So it'll be really important that they're good at answering our questions. So other than that, I think it's pretty good though.
I had one additional question. Michael, this is just for you. We don't list anything in here. I mean, the majority of the firms that you suggested we send this to are out of state. Do we have any limitations on working with companies that are out of the state? Do they have to have any kind of license in Arizona or have any relationship with, Corporation Commission or Secretary of State or any, do we have our hands tied in any way to have to do business with people that are within the state because we're a public entity?
I do not believe so. We do a lot of business with companies in other states.
Okay, perfect.
One final question, since this involves the superintendent search, do we need to run any of this by legal before we begin this process?
This is more just part of the procurement process, so I wouldn't think that legal would have any comment, honestly.
Okay, thank you. Always want to make sure I'm in good with the attorneys. Okay, so you are asking us then to approve this RFQ process, incorporating the 14 items you previously provided, these 4 items with a small tweak. And then did you want something specific added, Board Member Clamor, about the transparency, or?
I don't think at this point it needs to be part of the evaluation criteria. I think it can be something that we provide as a priority of ours in the process once they're selected. Michael, do you have any issue with that? Or do you think it needs to be part of this? I just think it's going to be hard to evaluate that when I'm not sure how they would demonstrate that.
I would agree that it would be hard to evaluate. I think it's a priority you could communicate after they have been selected, like you said.
Okay. Agreed. So I'll just hold that thought for now. And then once we get to the process in January, we can communicate that in a different way.
Okay. Then I will move to approve the RFQ as discussed.
I will second.
Having a first and a second, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. One addendum to that, not the addendum to the actual motion, but as you're going through this process, Executive Director Vaughn, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the board if you need clarification as we're going through, and we'll do our best to provide that. Thank you. We're going to take a short recess before we continue with the rest of our agenda. Section 8, information and discussion agenda items. We will be back in 2 minutes. back. This meeting is now back in session, and we will continue with agenda item 8A, discussion and revisions to job descriptions, superintendent and planning superintendent. This will be presented by Director Reichs, I believe.
Is that in? Okay. Good evening, President Moran, members of the governing board, Superintendent Gunning, and attendees. Today I brought to you the draft job descriptions for the planning superintendent and the superintendent positions. If I heard earlier correctly, my intention was today for us to discuss some initial feedback, but it sounds maybe we were going to do that at a later time, but I'm happy to take feedback now and take some notes if you prefer.
Yeah, I think we'll have maybe an initial conversation today. I just don't think we have enough information to have a final conversation today. So yeah, we can, I guess, however you want to start this process. I think probably the first thing that we need to discuss is our intention for this search position. Do we intend to search for a planning and superintendent, or do we intend to search for a superintendent? Board members, I'm asking you.
Are
Yes.
you open? Okay, I'm
Yes,
sorry. I
open
didn't know
the
if you were
floor.
I'm not sure
feedback
if you
on
were
that.
directing that somewhere else. So just back up one second, I'll answer your question, but just 1 second. So the planning superintendent job description that you have drafted is brand new. Is that correct?
It is, it's,
Okay.
we had a draft previously that was not ever approved. So yes, I would consider it brand new.
Okay. And then the job description for superintendent is what's in yellow has been approved prior, and then the stuff that is not in yellow is something that you have added to the draft just to enhance the description.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay. Thank you for that. So now to go back to your original question, just so that I can understand. Yes, I think at the last meeting, maybe it was in 2 meetings ago in November, I don't remember. We talked about our desire to have a previously experienced superintendent, potentially trying to find someone who had some type of superintendent experience prior to coming to Litchfield. So I would agree that having a job description that says planning superintendent might turn some of those people off, because if they've already been a superintendent, not knowing, even though some of those skill sets may be the same, I think having that, we're hiring them long-term for a superintendent. So how would that work if we, if we have someone come on, I don't exactly know how the contract process will work, but if we had someone come on while Jody, they will be coming on while Jody is still here, they would overlap, but then we would have to approve a second job description. You see what I'm saying? Like after that point, or we hire them for the job we want them to do long-term, and then they do that and Jody's doing her job in parallel.
So I think that's where we need clarity. So this position was my position originally. So when I was originally hired, I was hired for planning superintendent, which then that gave me a year of transition with different responsibilities. And the superintendent role held the superintendent responsibilities. So I think that's where you have to have clarity. I don't know too, can you have, that would be a legal question. Can you have 2 superintendents? So I think you're going to have to decide or determine what title it's going to be, because I don't think you can have 2 superintendents at the same time.
Even if they have a different responsibility, you're talking just from a title perspective.
Well, I don't know how you would have the same title with different duties.
Okay.
Okay. So I think that is obviously a piece that we need to determine. So I think there's multiple ways to go about this. And as a board, we haven't had the discussion to determine what it is exactly we want this to look like. So I think some of the options that are out there, and I think we can potentially think about this and come back, or maybe we just need to make the decision tonight. So Option number one, and I'll write these down as I'm saying them. Option number one is hire planning superintendent. They would shadow Superintendent Gunning. Superintendent Gunning would still be primary decision maker in charge for that first year. Option number two, hire a superintendent, and Superintendent Gunning would move into a different title, Superintendent of Special Projects. I don't know what that would look like. I don't know what the options are behind that. Because it is true that you can't have two people in charge. We have to have, just like when we hired the deputy superintendent, we have to have a superintendent and a deputy superintendent, or a superintendent and it wouldn't be superintendent emeritus, but something, to that effect. Option number three would be I guess a hybrid, in that we would still hire a planning superintendent, but maybe that planning superintendent would be planning superintendent for 6 months. And then in January of 2024, basically give that person 6 months to come in, build relationships, learn, and then at the 6-month mark, take over the helm, and still have Jody available as a resource for questions and support during, the first, 6 months on the job, which would be the second half of the school year. Any other scenarios we should consider? Any thoughts on those? And again, we would need to run this by legal too, because I'm not really sure what we can do with that, but go ahead, Dr. Dowling.
Yeah, I've got a question. When I saw the planning, there's 3 job descriptions, and that one of them, I'm not sure why it was even in there, but the 2 drafts. But are we saying that there's going to be 2 job postings? A planning superintendent and a regular superintendent at the same time? Is that what you envisioned?
No, I mean, what I would envision, Dr. Dowling, is that you're we're looking for a superintendent who would, in that, whatever you determine the first year for 6 months or whatever the case might be, will be in the role of planning superintendent to then transition into that superintendent role. So I think that would be described to the search firm and all of that, and to the candidates as we work through that process.
If I've gone through the process, so if I were to see a planning superintendent, I probably wouldn't apply for it, because I wouldn't understand what it was unless you've got a search firm and you happen to be part of their quote stable of candidates, and you're going to find that. So you have to be very leery of getting the people they recycle until they get them a job. But that's neither here nor there. But why can't you have 2 superintendents? Has anybody checked that out?
We would have to check on that. I don't know. I don't know of any district that has. There is a district out there that has split the like the business side, and they have, and I don't think it's called a superintendent. I forget what it's called, like assistant superintendent that oversees one side, and a superintendent, assistant superintendent that oversees the other side. And then that's how they report to the board. But I don't know. I think that would be a question for legal of what does that look like?
Yeah, it would be a question in the posting, the job posting, in my mind, that if hired, you would be, quote, a planning superintendent title for 6 months. And then it would change, and Jody may become the planning superintendent, so to speak, or a different name. And then the new person would take over if that's what you desire as a board. This is strange to me. It's odd. the way it's worded. So I don't know what to say. I don't, when I saw it, I didn't totally understand it. Oh, I probably should have called, but it's kind of tricky. Or, you know, if I were selected for the finance superintendent, all of a sudden I come in here and it can go both ways. The administrators, the board start looking at this person and saying, do we really want this person? It's almost like a internship, so to speak. So, and then it could be pushed back on that, and then what do you do?
Yeah,
This
for
is
me,
tricky.
yeah, for me, that piece comes more down to the contract and the length of initial contract that we offer to the position. I think right now, I don't even know that tonight we need to decide what we're going to call this person. I think we need to decide what we want this to look like of those three scenarios.
Yeah.
And then we need to figure out with legal, and I can do that with legal, and just because someone else hasn't done it before doesn't mean we can't do it. So what does this board want the next year and a half to look like with our single employee, or perhaps 2 employees?
I would like to see a hybrid, something between 2 and 3. I do not think we're going to get the candidate that we are seeking if we put forth this job description as a planning superintendent for a full year. I don't think we're going to do that. So for me personally, option number 1 does not, I agree with Dennis that it feels sticky. It feels something, it's not lining up right. Just based on what we have here. So I think that having a hybrid now, whether we call them the same thing or whether that's legal, I don't know the answer to that, and we'll have to have more information on that. But whether this person is here for 6 months or whether this person and Jody somehow break up duties differently, I'm open to what that interpretation might look like, but I do not think we need to hire, as it is stated here, a planning superintendent for an entire year. I don't think we're going to get the candidate we want by doing that.
Board Member Zadamo?
I'm in agreement that I think I'd like to see some kind of hybrid situation so that they can come in. I mean, I really see it as a win for whoever does come in if they get to have the first 6 months of their contract where they're getting to figure out our district and see all the ins and outs. And then when they start and take over after 6 months, they will know everything that they can learn in those 6 months and then really be like, here's the changes I want to make, here's the things I want to do when they take over, versus if they just come in and they don't know anything about our district, then they're coming in blind with possibly making changes that may not work. So I think that finding a hybrid is the better plan, because I do agree. I don't think we're going to get who we want if we tell them they have to come in as a planning superintendent for a year. But I also think that how much we pay them is going to matter to all that. So, you know.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree. I think a hybrid is probably best. I mean, it's a chicken and egg situation, because for me, it depends on who the candidate is that we want and what their experience is and where we are at the time, because one of the main things that needs to happen in Superintendent Gunning's final year of contract is the revamp or, redo of the strategic plan. And so we can't I don't think it's fair to create a strategic plan without the buy-in and input of the new superintendent, because you can't hire a new superintendent and say, here you go, here's the plan we made for you. We've got to have that person involved, which is one of the main reasons that we want to have this year of overlap, so we can then hit the ground running at the end of Superintendent Gunning's contract. So all that to say, I don't have a great answer for this either, but we need overlap, and there is plenty of work to do. And I think that is a big advantage, because we know we've run lean for so long, and we finally do have some more resources at the district admin area, but we're still not to the point where we are being proactive instead of reactive. This Thomas Heck situation is a great example of that. We are deploying folks from the district office to a campus, and those things are going to continually happen. But I think what we need to truly get ahead is someone who is thinking about the long term and has different ideas, fresh ideas, and can come in and dream a little bit and take some risks. And I think that's going to take someone different. And I think the sooner we can get that person in here, I think the better for the long term of the district.
Could I offer a suggestion just based on what you just said?
Yeah.
In the hybrid is if we had someone come in and maybe their main focus for the first semester of that school year was to develop the strategic plan. So almost flip those roles. So I don't know, I haven't thought this all the way through, but maybe that's just a possibility. So through collecting information from the community, from our staff, I mean, that sort of forces them to be a part of every stakeholder group that we have very quickly, which I think would be good. It gives them an opportunity to work with Jody and find out what has happened and what has worked with our strategic plan and where there might be some changes. But also gives them sort of direct access to creating that vision and that dream and big ideas and all of that kind of stuff. So maybe that's part of the hybrid situation where they lead that effort in the beginning, and then as that transition happens, they're transitioning into more of the daily role, which is, you know, Jody's responsibility right now. Just a thought.
Okay, so we can take that information and revisit with our discussion on January 10th. In the meantime, what I would ask the board members to do, including our newest board member, is to take a look at this superintendent draft job description and do some homework by looking at other superintendent job descriptions. I got a few myself from across the country today to contrast and compare. There is a variety of detail in those. Some of them are very high level, where they basically list kind of 5 or 6 objectives, and they don't get into the nitty gritties of doing, you know, reviews of their direct reports and things like that. So I think that's what we need to come back with in the January 10th meeting, is some specific ideas and feedback for what we want the actual job description to look like. And during that study session, we can discuss and collaborate on kind of perfecting that process. So then that is ready when the RFQ firm comes back to be able to provide them with our ideal job description. And I will commit in the meantime to talking to legal and see if they have any experience with this transition, and if we can have 2 and what that would look like, or any caveats or pros and cons they might have to that process. Okay. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
Okay, Director Reichs, do you have any questions based on that discussion?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this part of the agenda? Okay, so we will revisit the superintendent job description and bring back more information for discussion at a study session on January 10th. Okay, agenda item 8B is next on our agenda, which is the superintendent goal scorecard update. The district communications strategic plan update specifically, which will be presented by Director Nuanez.
Madam President, members of the governing board, Superintendent Gunning, I'm here tonight to present the update on the communication strat plan. When I first transitioned into the district, the district was in the process of developing that strat plan, which one did not exist at the time. We have contracted out to aid with that process and to kind of expedite that. It was started with a baseline communication assessment, referred to as our BCA summary. What that did is they did an evaluation and did an analysis of all of our platforms and what we were doing right, where we had gaps. So the implementation of the strategic communications plan, which we want to do and make sure that we are in full alignment with our district strat plan as well. Some of the places where we did find gaps are internal engagement and communication, some of our parent and family communications, external communications with residents, with non-students, staff and parent engagement. So these are just things that were not truly just a deficit, but things that had a lot of potential for improvement. The last two, or the marketing and the brand management is kind of where we were kind of, there was kind of a big hole there. We didn't really have a direction. Graphics weren't looking the same. Logos were kind of just there. So that was one of the things that I came in with a focus. I have a background in that. So that's one of the things that I really pushed for in doing that until that we can implement that in the process. So that was the good point of that, is that, it gave me a lot of confidence and in being here was the fact that a lot of my thoughts and processes that I wanted to do for the district to move it forward was already part of this BCA. One of the other parts of that was our crisis communications. That is one of the things that, you really don't want to use on a regular basis, but you always want to make sure that you are fully prepared if and when that time comes. One of the things that we will want to make sure, and we'll touch base on it a little bit further into the presentation, is to make sure that we're utilizing all of our platforms to meet our stakeholders and our parents where they most need to receive those communications. An update on the communication survey. So this is part of how we were going to get the data that we're going to utilize in implementing the communication strat plan. The survey is open until the end of December. It was initially going to close on the 15th, but we wanted to give some of the employee aspect of responses, some time where we know that they're very busy during the day, very tired at night, and then hopefully give them that opportunity if they have some time once they're home, relaxed, better frame of mind, we can get that data to get a lot of the responses. We've been pretty pleased with the response to date. Last week when we did take an assessment of the responses, we had over 1,200 responses to date. Our contractor who we are working with, CISO, actually stated that they were extremely impressed with the amount of responses that we had received up to with the amount of time that we had it open. Some of the data that the preliminary data that he did share with me was close to 85% of our respondents were satisfied with the amount and the type of information that they were currently receiving from the district, with numerous comments in the other that they have seen a drastic improvement in a lot of the communications that have been coming out of the district. Some of the preferences that are showing up are emails with text redirect. Basically what that is anytime, and that I've been utilizing as the communications director, is that we send out an important message via email. We know people are at work, they don't have the opportunity to check their emails regularly, so we follow it up with a text, just directing them that there is an important message waiting for them in their inbox. Principal and teacher emails along with text is also a big preference on there, as our classroom newsletters. The communication strategic plan implementation. The survey data analysis, we hope to complete with our contractor by the end of January 2023. And we hope to have the implementation of a lot of those data points up and running and being utilized by February 2023. Like I did mention earlier, a lot of those things that they have recommended are things that we had already started implementing once I came on board. Additional focus and enhancements, LESD branding. Want to make sure that we're focusing. We want to create standard color palettes, logo recognition. So across all of our platforms, websites, social media, external publications. And one of the other things that I would like to see is we want to utilize, typically we see media coverage as we only see it when something bad happens. One of the big things that I'm trying to push and to make sure that there are good partner when we do have things, developing those relationships with the media outlets to make sure that they are more apt to come and cover our positive things that are happening. And, you know, that's a wealth of just branding and PR work that we can achieve. Staff and student recruitment and retention. That is huge. That is huge. We're going to put a large focus on that. We're currently developing some preliminary campaigns for that, especially now as we head into the new year with our kinder experience. We will be launching a campaign for that to make sure that we get them in early and then find ways to make sure that we keep them in our district. And last is our crisis communication and preparedness. Once again, the plan there is to make sure that we're hitting them across all of our platforms. We know that each demographic that we do deal with have that specific little platform. You know, the younger parents, the younger generations lean towards social media. The older ones, and within the social media, there are the different apps that they tend to use. So we're making sure we're getting all this data, and we're reviewing analytics regularly now. Just for example, from July 1st to yesterday, the analytics have shown that we have increased in followers 120%. Our parent and our social media engagement from July till now to the previous 6 months is up over 400%. So we are definitely heading in the right direction. I think we're starting to build those relationships with our parents. They're able to, by the use of video, which is a very strong platform, and that is what a lot of districts and consultants are recommending to districts, are to the use of video. People want to be able to see and hear what is going on in their classrooms with their teachers, and not only just in an education, but it's great to see, you know, the celebratory events, you know, and just the nice and the cute moments that make the whole full educational experience really great for everybody. At this point, open to any questions anybody may have.
I have a question. Is it possible for us to see the baseline communication assessment? I mean, I'd love to actually see what the audit looked like.
Yeah, I can forward that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that all of these areas of opportunity are great, but it's hard for us to understand what the baseline is. I mean, all of these things we've been doing in some form or fashion, but knowing that there's some plans to increase that, but really being able to see where we've come from and then be able to juxtapose that with, you know, in another 6 or 12 months to be able to look back. It's helpful to actually see what that baseline looked like.
Absolutely. And a lot of the information in that you will see there is that previously a lot of the things were being done, they just weren't being targeted as specifically as we could have done as we're starting to narrow that focus in.
Yeah.
So I can get that forwarded.
Bless you. Bless you.
I will say one thing that happened yesterday that I really liked is Western Sky sent out, I think it was Western Sky, it may have been the district, but someone sent out a text that said, if you're on these 2 buses, the bus is going to be late because we have a we had a particular shortage that day. But the text itself basically said something like, to the writers of buses, and then it was a, bit.ly link. And then when I clicked on that link, it took me to the entire message. So as a parent, I appreciate being able to click and see the message rather than getting a text that says, check your email, because then I have to go and do something different and I can't just click on that and see. I understand that texting has a limited amount of information that we want to include on there, but any of those shortcuts like that for me as a parent are much appreciated. So
What you're seeing there is, it is a function of our In Touch platform that we're currently using, which has expanded to unlimited characters, which once we get to a certain character, it switches over into what it almost looks like an additional link with our header on it. So
Okay.
that's what you're seeing.
okay,
And-
that I love.
Yes.
Do more of that, please. Yes, as from a parent perspective, that would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Um,
we are in process of, like I say, utilizing a lot more text, because we know, especially in the middle of the day, that is our quickest way to contact our parents.
Okay, so just kind of to summarize this strategic plan or some of the things that are happening. So you're going to we did this baseline assessment and that gave us some areas of improvement. You're going to take the information from the survey and you're going to determine what areas of improvement or preference for communications that you're getting based on that feedback. And then you're going to come up with steps to implement all of that some point between February and whatever that end date would be, depending on what those specific steps are.
Yes, some of the things that will be suggested or are suggested in the baseline. There's a series of the way it is structured. There's like do nows, things that are achievable relatively quick and like from now the next 6 months. And then there's the ones that might take a year to really fully get up to speed. And then those even long-term goals, where we start talking about, potential rebranding, updating logos, just that constant update where you're keeping things fresh, and up to date with, the current either platforms or any other kind of technology.
Okay, excellent. Can we put you on our future agenda for maybe May, June, July to get an update on where you're at and things that were accomplished through the rest of this school year and kind of your objectives for, the time frame after that?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to come and show you all the great improvements that are happening.
Okay, that would be great. Any other board member questions or comments on the communication strat plan?
I had one more question, just in terms of the format of your strategic plan. So I know that we've been trying to implement, we have an overall strategic plan and then sort of all of the departments underneath that, whether it's principals or other departments, student services, that support student services, have, kind of that scorecard look to them to mimic our strategic plan. Are there any plans to sort of put your format into that so that it's consistent with other district strategic plans, or is this going to be completely separate?
Right now, it'll be a separate entity, but we can definitely look at incorporating it into some of the current structures that we're using.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that these things dovetail with our pillars, and you're probably doing things to meet those goals and objectives already in terms of communication. So seeing those overlap, and maybe Jody, that comes on yours as well. I'm not sure where the best place for that is, but it might be interesting to see how those overlap. So thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation and for all your hard work in this area. I know as a parent, I've noticed improvements in the communication, and I would venture to say the other parents up here has as well. So I look forward to us improving and getting even better.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Okay, next on our agenda is item 8C, which is the multi-year budget forecast presentation. I've been looking forward to this, and this will be presented by Executive Director Vaughn.
Madam President, members of the Governing Board, Superintendent Gunning, colleagues and community, thank you for joining me tonight to discuss the district's multi-year budget forecast covering fiscal years 2023 through 2027. Tonight's presentation aligns with the district's strategic plan to increase stakeholder knowledge and understanding of school finance and funding. First, I'd like to cover some key concepts that we'll lean on heavily in the discussion tonight. First, we have recurring revenues. These are revenues the district can plan to receive year after year and are typically part of statute or the state's funding formula. They're fairly stable. We have recurring expenses, ones that we plan to continue year after year. Examples include compensation increases, ongoing positions, etc. It's best practice from a budgeting standpoint to match recurring expenses to recurring revenue sources. Having these two in balance is known as having a structurally balanced budget. One-time resources are those that cannot be relied on being received year after year. Examples may include budget balance carryover or resources from volatile cash funds that may not continue year after year, such as gift and donations. One-time expenses are expenses that are planned not to continue. They may include pilot programs or one-time compensation. For each budget scenario we review tonight, we'll look both at the balance of recurring revenues and expenses, as well as how much may be available from a one-time resource perspective. We also have some key concepts that will help us differentiate our different scenarios. The first is Prop 123 triggers. Proposition 123 was passed into law with voter approval as part of the inflation funding lawsuit, and it added triggers to the state constitution where, if those triggers are hit, districts may not receive the inflation funding to the M&O budget that we've grown accustomed to receiving. There's also the aggregate expenditure limit, which, as a reminder, is a statewide limit on the budgets of school districts, regardless of the funding for schools passed by the state legislature. If the limit is not waived by March 1st each year, districts are required to reduce their budgets to be under the limit. Specifically, Litchfield Elementary's potential cut, if the aggregate expenditure limit is not lifted for this year, is $14.6 million. The Prop 123 trigger in the Constitution specifically says that if ADE becomes 49% or more of the state's general fund appropriations, the legislature has the option to reduce the next year's funding by the prior year's inflation adjustment. The state's Joint Legislative Budget Committee forecasts that the state will meet that 49% trigger for the 2027 fiscal year, meaning the legislature will have the option to pull back inflation funding. That brings us to the various scenarios that we'll be looking at tonight. We'll have one, which is our best case scenario, where the AEL is lifted and the inflation funding is not pulled back in 2027. One where inflation funding is pulled back in 2027, but the AEL is lifted. And then the same scenarios if the AEL is not lifted for this year. Again, our first scenario is our best case scenario where inflation funding is not pulled back in 2027 and the AEL is lifted. I'll spend some additional time on this slide walking you through this format because all our scenarios will use the same format. We start with weighted student count and our projected M&O revenues for those years. This allows us to see what our recurring revenues are projected to be. We then have expenditure estimates, which leaves us at the bottom with projected recurring resources available. You can see in this scenario, we'll be dipping into reserves until 2027, where if growth plan pans out as presently projected by the demographers, we will have a small amount of recurring resources available. Moving on to the one-time resources, we can look at the district's projected operating reserves compared to the level of reserves we've previously discussed as being appropriate for the district. You can see from year to year it varies, but that it appears that under our best case scenario, we would have 1.7 million of one-time resources available to spend between now and 2027. As we move to scenario 2, you can see the impact of the legislative option to pull back inflation funding in 2027. Whereas previously we had a small positive balance of reoccurring resources projected to be available in 2027, now we have a $3.2 million shortfall in 2027. What I think is really interesting from a budgetary perspective about that number is that it's so close to the amount you can see we're projecting adding back to M&O from the ESSER grants in 2025. What this scenario shows us is that the district is projected to be able to afford adding back those items from the ESSER grant if the state does not pull back inflation funding in 2027, but cannot afford to do so if they pull back that funding. As we move forward towards 2025, this may be an indicator that the district should consider continuing those ESSER items as a one-time extension to 2026 to see if the legislature will pull back inflation funding or not in 2027 prior to making a more permanent decision in this area. However, it does highlight the importance of the ROI work around the ESSER grant items. You can also see the impact of the inflation funding being pulled back on the reserves or one-time resources. This is because with less reoccurring resources, we would be required to dip into the reserves more to maintain the same level of spending. By 2027, in this scenario, we would not have excess reserves to spend. The district would be within reserve targets. In scenario 3, we start looking at what it may look like if the AEL is triggered this year. From a reoccurring resource perspective, there is no impact, so this slide looks the same as scenario 1. When we look at the impact of the AEL on our reserves, it becomes clear how drastically impacted they would be. If the entire AEL cut was absorbed by M&O, our operating reserves would be 6.3 million under our lower reserve target by 2027. However, we do have some additional options when deciding how to allocate the potential budget reduction from the AEL. It can be shared between M&O, unrestricted capital outlay, and the classroom site fund. Based on this scenario, if the AEL is not lifted this year, it would be wise to shift potentially $6.5 to $7 million of the cut to unrestricted capital outlay fund to protect our operational resources, at least at the 26% we've previously discussed. And the district has sufficient carryover in the unrestricted capital outlay fund where we could potentially follow that strategy. Scenario 4 is our worst case scenario where both the inflation funding in 2027 is pulled back and the AEL is not lifted. From a reoccurring resource perspective, this scenario is the same as scenario 2, where you can see we may not be able to afford to continue the ESSER items in 2027. However, the AEL not being lifted on top of the inflation funding being pulled back in 2027 have a much more drastic impact on our reserves. And you can see that here, where the district could have as much as an 8.9 million, could be as much as 8.9 million under the 26% lower reserve limit we've previously discussed. However, by balancing the 2027 budget and sharing some of the burden of the AEL with the unrestricted capital outlay fund as previously discussed, that shortfall could largely be avoided by 2027. That's one of the benefits of doing these forecasts so far out, is you really can make long-term planning decisions around those sorts of things. It's important to recognize that all of these scenarios share some key assumptions. First is that student growth will occur as forecasted by the district's demographer in March. We assumed that class size would remain the same, that all increased costs for benefits would be passed on to the employee or eliminated through plan changes. Compensation increases at 2%. ESSER costs continued in M&O starting in 2025, and that the 2023 temporary positions of the 3 grade level aides in grades kindergarten through 3rd and 6th grade, as well as the contracted guest teachers, would be continued. These assumptions are not necessarily plans or recommendations, but simply a baseline for our budget discussion this year. This slide shows a detail of the ESSER costs that were assumed to be continued in 2025. It's not all ESSER costs, but positions, summer school programming, and tutoring program, largely because we've already had significant discussion around those programs being successful and something that the district may be interested in continuing. You can see almost $1 million as math specialists, 440,000 for behavior techs on down. These are the other 2023 positions we've previously discussed. The grade level aides have cost us approximately $610,000 this year, and the contracted guest teachers have cost us approximately $690,000 this year. Looking at our scenarios side by side with that context, you can see that even in our best case scenario, we do not have much additional reoccurring resources available for us to expand compensation increases or benefits, much more than what our base assumptions were of 2% and the cost of benefits being passed on. If we want to do more this year, it will need to be a give and take where we cut other items to free up resources to be able to do so. One potential option for doing so may be the 2023 positions that we've previously discussed. This time, I'm available to answer any questions you may have on the district's multi-year budget forecast, and I welcome any discussion around the information we've shared tonight.
I think I have 2 questions right off the bat. I'm sure more will come up in the discussion. The first on the slide just before this, I think on mine, it's a slide 18, where you say the contract substitute teachers not in ESSER have cost us $690,000. Does this take into account what we've saved by not contracting those substitutes through ESI?
We're still contracting subs through ESI because even with the contracted subs and ESI, we're not having all of our sub needs met.
Absolutely, but that should be reduced. Are we not even seeing any reductions in ESI by having someone on staff?
We'll have to look at that. I haven't directly done that analysis.
Okay. I mean, I don't anticipate that we were going to eliminate that cost altogether, but
Right.
I'm hopeful that there's some reduction there because by having someone on campus every day, it should reduce that at least slightly. My
Right.
other question is really, I think maybe it's on scenario 2 or what, 4, 3 and 4, maybe, I don't know, where the AL is not lifted. Are you assuming the assumptions that you have here are based on no changes whatsoever? So us covering the cost 100%, not going in and saying, okay, we may not do X, Y, and Z now that we know the AL is not lifted. So there's some savings here that aren't accounted for because most likely we're not just going to say, okay, we're just going to take a $14 million hit. We're probably going to make some adjustments to that.
Correct. I didn't change the assumptions between the scenarios.
Okay, so we're taking that hit fully. That's not accounting for any changes we may potentially make since you
Right.
don't know what they are. Okay, got it. Thank you.
I have some questions and comments. My first one is I understand how you arrived at the 1.7 million in quote unquote, one-time resources available to spend by projecting out to 2027 and saying that's what we would have under the best case scenario. What I would like us to consider, because that number is based on the upper target of reserves, I would like us to be able as a board to consider falling somewhere between our midpoint target and our upper target on reserves in order to balance what we're going to want to happen, which is going to be an increase to our employees in total compensation and maintaining or adding other things to improve the student success, the academic piece of that. So I guess I want to say that to say, and again, I wouldn't suggest that we absorb all of that in 1 year, but I just want to let the board know, I think there's a little more wiggle room maybe in that, because we don't have to land at the top of the reserves, but I'm happy to hear what Executive Director Vaughn thinks about that.
I would just caution, I don't disagree that we could spend more one-time resources than what I showed, because you're exactly right. I calculated down to that 32.5%, because when we had that discussion in the past, the board went between 32 and 33%. So I just met it in the middle. But I do think we have to be careful about using those resources for anything close to compensation increases, because compensation increases are not one-time expenses. They are reoccurring expenses. And as you look at the scenarios around what reoccurring resources we have available to us, even in the best case scenario, assuming a 2% raise each year between now and 2027, we're only looking at having $200,000 of additional reoccurring resources available to us. And that's assuming that the demographers' pretty generous growth estimates come to fruition, which we'll see over the course. They'll be updating it in March. We have had preliminary discussions with them where they have shared with us that, and I think we'll all be able to use our personal experience to relate to this somewhat, that they have seen some slowdown in growth and the housing market. So I really do think these student counts and revenues are also best case scenario. The other thing I would caution, which I hadn't previously mentioned, is in the past, when the district has provided expenditure estimates, we were very conservative, and there's reasons to be, but in full transparency, I did everything I could to be more realistic. For example, historically, the district would assume that all vacant positions would be filled tomorrow and would be filled for the rest of the year. In this model, what I did was, if the position was vacant, I assumed it would remain vacant for at least a month. And if it had remained vacant for 2 months, I assumed it wouldn't be filled. So much more realistic. And I'm nowhere in the model do I add back in the vacant positions. So I'm assuming that those vacancies continue. If you think about that from a just kind of logic perspective, that makes some amount of sense, because if you're having a hard time filling a position, you'll likely continue having a hard time filling the position unless you do something to make that not be the case, right? For another example, I looked at encumbrances year over year and budgets year over year to see what percentages actually ended up being spent. And I did gross them down based on that. And so I'm not saying these estimates are exactly right. They're still just estimates, but they should be much more realistic than what has previously been presented to the governing board.
Thank thank you. I appreciate that. Actually, a realistic scenario. One of the things that I would like us to look at as we go into these budget discussions um, over the next few months is I want us to look at our current total compensation and the policies behind those. So for example, our unpaid leave and those things that end up costing us money that I just want to have a better understanding of that. And if there are some ways that we can change some policies that would benefit our teachers today and benefit our students today, rather than accumulating these expenses to be incurred at some later time in the future. Similarly, I'd like us to look at our insurance. I know we talked about that at the last meeting, but what I think was missing from that scenario is that we have another policy that I believe we pay for that we have employees that are grandfathered into. I'd like to see how much that's costing us per employee and hopefully put that into the mix to determine if we should continue with that plan or if it's fiscally irresponsible for us to continue providing that plan. And anything else that you might know about. I mean, I don't even think I know all of the policies that we might have in place, that we've had in place for a long time, that again, we might want to, as a board, look to rebalance based on what our current priorities are. Does that make sense, Executive Director Vaughn? Do you know what I'm asking for there?
It does.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't even know everything I'm asking for there, but I think you know more than I would know about that. Okay, board members, do you have any questions on this presentation?
Not really a question, more just, this is just a lot of information definitely for us to process when we're going forward with budget talks because there's a lot of things we have to do. And I don't think any of us sitting up here are like, oh yeah, we're just going to do 2% raises and that's going to work for us. I just don't see any of us being like, that's our plan for the next so many years. So I just feel like we're going to just have to keep evaluating this and seeing what we can do. I think that this might also play into our, branding and recruiting and things like that too. It's really going to show us we need to make sure that we are getting every student in this district that we can, so that we can get every dollar in here that we can to do what we want to do for our students and our staff. This is just a lot. I don't necessarily like all these numbers.
I just one sort of clarification. In your key assumptions, you mentioned that the 100% of the increase for employee benefits is passed on to the employee. Is that is for every year moving forward? And that's assuming a 10% increase 24, 25, 26, and 27?
Yeah, so if you just look at the slide that I have up as an example, you'll see that I have salary increases and related benefits each year. And then ASRS contribution rate changes. And then underneath it, increased benefits costs absorbed. And you'll see across the board, that was zero. So using this as an example, and let me go back to let's go back to the best case scenario, just so the numbers look a little bit more happy.
Let's do that.
Yeah. So we've talked previously that it's all the same pot, right? So you can see the projected cost of a 2% raise in the salary increase and related benefits line. And so if you wanted to keep this balanced the way it is, you could decrease the raise to then absorb some of the benefits. But I think going below a 2% raise would not necessarily be advisable. But I think what this really is showing is that if we want to do anything above the base assumptions I made, which were not a recommendation, they're just base assumptions, that we would need to figure out what we're willing to cut
Right.
to make resources available to do that.
Understood.
Dr. Dowling, any comments or questions?
No, I don't have any comments.
I'm sorry, I have
Go
one
ahead,
more.
yeah.
I keep coming in and out of the conversation. I apologize. I didn't have all these ready at one time. How do you best see us as a governing board in collaboration with you and the rest of the admin team using this tool? I understand sort of in year one, it makes sense to us because it's very clear. It's very clear to me, and I hope that it's very clear to everybody here that what the numbers are saying, although there's a lot of numbers and a lot of words and a lot of calculations on here, that we don't have enough money to do everything we've said we want to do. Right? We can't keep every position that we've added. We can't buy new curriculum. We can't give everybody the raises that we want. We can't pay 100% for benefits. We can't do all of that and maintain fiscal responsibility. I mean, I think that's pretty easy to see. So as we move through this, how do you see us using this tool? So as we go through 2024's budget and we make those tough decisions sort of in year one, do you anticipating just updating this as revisions come? And you can say to us then as we move forward and say, oh, but we want this, and oh, we want this. Is this sort of a reoccurring, okay, well, let's go back to this and see where this puts us out? Because it's important for us to be responsible, not only today, but knowing that, 4 years from now, we can't be
Sure.
too much in debt. So how do you see us using this?
So obviously, this is the first time the district has done this, but what I'm envisioning is that as we go through the budget process this year, I'll use this as a base for some of the discussions. So when we have the presentation from the consultant on the compensation study, I can obviously change some of these numbers and model what that looks like going forward. I hope that for this year, what it will allow us to see is how much we need to find in the opposite direction to balance the budget. Going forward, in 2024, around this same time, what I'd imagine is that the years just update. So you're going to have a 2024 forecast through 2028. I think there's no point in revisiting this particular version of this model next year. Because at that point we'll know how 2023 actually panned out, and I suspect that this will just become a new December addition to our normal budget process, is at least just where I'm coming from.
Okay.
I would certainly open up for any feedback on that, though.
I mean, I think that's a good plan. I think, like you said, this is brand new, so we'll figure out how to incorporate this, but I agree with that assessment. President Moran, you were talking about potentially looking at those one-time resources available to spend based on our reserve, the midpoint versus the higher. Is it your request, I guess, that we do that for every year moving forward, or that would somehow slide if, let's say, this year we were able to shoulder some of that, but then in 2025 we weren't? I mean, that would shift over time, or you would just say, let's move, like right now it's at 32.5 across the board. You're saying move it to 30% across the board.
No, I just think we need to take that in consideration. If we're sitting here and we're trying to balance everything we need to balance, and it's going to be really critical in 2025, as Executive Director Vaughn points out, when the ESSER funds are not there and we want to keep the math specialists because we're seeing that's impacting academics, we're going to have to make more hard choices. And so one of the choices that we can make there is to say, okay, we're comfortable taking our reserves down. That's not going to be a permanent replacement for that, but we can then maybe have some other compromises that are made to be able to make that like a 3-year process, or be able to, if we had to cut the math specialists, decide we're only going to have them at certain schools or whatever. So I just think that knowing that we have some flexibility in what we want that number to be, then we can see over time, okay, yeah, it's getting closer to the low limit and we're not comfortable spending that money anymore. Or, okay, we had a year that something happened unexpected and now we have more than we thought we were going to have. And so we restore some of that. I just wanted us to have an idea that that would be the minimum number available, and that we have to decide based on our priorities if we're comfortable spending more than that and making sure that it's worth it.
Understood. Thank you.
Can I
Yes.
jump in?
Yeah.
So if you look at this slide, I mean, the discussion that's presently happening is the reason that I showed the reserves compared to midpoint target. But what I would caution is you can see how year to year it fluctuates. That's the other example, or that's the other benefit of doing a longer term financial forecast. So in this scenario, even if we were going to use the midpoint, I wouldn't recommend spending more than 3.8 over the course of all of those years, because what those numbers are showing is at that point in time how much would be available. But if you spend it in 2024, it won't be available in 2025. So really what that's showing is how much one-time resources could be expended over that entire period, not in any particular year. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, so really you're saying, for example, in 2024, the midpoint target, there's $5 million there, but if you were to spend the $5 million, you would end up in a deficit. You'd end up closer to the lower limit later. So what we would need to consider is, okay, if we would have 3.8, you're saying, because that's the minimum across those years. So we would have that 3.8, but we couldn't spend, we could, but we would not want to spend all of that at once. We would want to say, okay, maybe we spend that in 25% increments over 4 years to allocate those funds in a
That's
smoother
right.
way.
Which is why on the, let me get to this slide. That's why here I tried to give an idea of what spreading it out over the number of years might look like. That's that reoccurring available per year and the one-time resources per year, which I really do think puts into context how little additional reoccurring resources we have, even in our best case scenario, to go above the base assumptions that I had made.
Okay, well, I think this forecast is very helpful. Like you said, we have not seen anything like this, and I think this gives us a better picture of the long-term impacts of the decisions that we're making today. And I also think, to your point earlier, it emphasizes the importance of the ROI on those ESSER positions and us really determining, and we have some time to be able to do that, to figure out if this is working, how are we going to retain these positions in the long term based on the funding that we have allocated. Thank you for putting this together. I know there was a lot of work and calculations for that, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on our agenda is item 8D, Learning Recovery Scorecard Update, which will be presented by Superintendent Gunning.
Madam President, members of the governing board, we'll kind of keep this short since it is getting late. You see the highlighted items, which are updated. The other thing that we wanted to let you know is that our finance team is working on updating all of the dollar amounts and updating, even bringing in what ESSER 2 components that we kept on that we're utilizing ESSER 3 dollars. as well as some of the recommendations that we've been working through for L. Thomas Heck. We also have additional needs for iPads for kindergarten teachers for upcoming assessment requirements by the state, as well as any other, like the retention stipends and those types of things. So they will be updating this over the next few weeks from the dollar perspective. But just wanted to give you an update on at least the items that had changed. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
One of the items on here under ESER 3 are the security guards for L. Thomas Heck and Woodlawn Creek Middle Schools. Do you know where we are in that hiring process?
They have interviewed. The security guard positions are being sought after highly in multiple districts. So it's kind of like beating them to the punch. So we have made some offers, but they've also accepted in other districts. So we're still in that process.
Okay, thank you. And then when can we expect kind of the revamp of this and the recategorization to be presented to the board?
So as you were so gracious to recognize that multi-year forecast was taking up a significant portion of my time. I'm hoping that I can work with our grants team to have this updated more fully for the January board meeting.
Okay, thank you. That's reasonable, so thank you. Any other board member questions or comments on learning recovery scorecard? Okay, then we will move on to agenda item 8E, the superintendent goal scorecard 22-23 update, also presented by Superintendent Gunning.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the governing board. I will cover this at high levels, not spending a ton of time since again, it is late. But wanted to be able to provide an update in regards to our scorecard. In the area of student success, you can see the areas, and we actually even color coded based on the goals that the governing board had set of where we were successful or where we almost met. And you can see that in relation to ELA from ESSA for grades 3 through 5 and then 6 through 8, as well as for math 3 through 5 and 6 through 8. The other area in which we know is extremely important and something that all of our schools are working on is strong student attendance. And at this time, we are exceeding that goal. Our goal was 90% student attendance, and we are at 92.32. Also, under student success and innovation, we had the deployment of our devices one-to-one, and that has all been done for 1st through 8th, and then now they are working on our kinders. Looking at our professional development, and that's something that we've been tracking for all of our certified staff. We wanted our participation rate to be 95% or higher, and it is at that. And then we also wanted our topics to be centralized around math curriculum, ELA, cooperative learning, mental health, and behavioral supports and technology. And we actually have 95% in those areas. And the 5% of others, you can see the content in which those are covered. Another piece, even though maybe it doesn't feel like it, is that retention piece. And our goal was to have an 88% retention. Currently at this time, we're at 90.2% for our certified staff. And we are at 87.8% for classified, which our goal was 73. Director Nuanez covered a lot of communication components, but here's some additional pieces is in looking at that parent communication and making sure that parents are up to date and have current academic information regarding their child. So we set a standard across the district as a whole. We know that we were looking at different types of communication and that communication across all of our schools. So we wanted to show you the text messages, emails, website, and social media use. Please note that the school text messages and emails do not include teachers. That would throw those numbers really high, which would look awesome. But this is just like coming directly from the school, like the principal level. These are just some of the diagnostics for all of our social media. A major addition, and we wanted to share, and so hopefully you have taken the time to really look through this, is all the additional supports and components that we've added in regards to safety by adding Director Benalis has been so helpful in looking at being able to be a part of the Southwest Valley Safety Summit, which also Executive Director Duplain has assisted with all of our safety protocols, our IGA with City of Litchfield, and then extensive collaboration with law enforcement, enhancing our threat assessments and security assessments, evacuation and reunification plans, review of our emergency operations, safety protocols, the training, school safety assessments and prevention teams, as we just prepare to go into next year and really assessing the needs of every campus and then what potential opportunities for funding for those needs. And then as a celebration, we also had a Wiggle Creek Safety Symposium, which occurred last week. And at that symposium, we had over 6 deputies from MCSO, as well as a lot of the experts that you see here, just sharing exactly the process and information in regards to threats that pertain directly to that campus and what steps took place. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Do any board members have questions on?
I don't have any questions. One, I just want to say thank you for putting this together. It was really easy to read. And just three things that stuck out to me that I just wanted to say thank you and commend you on. First, I think the progress that your team has made just in the safety arena alone in the last couple of months. I think bringing on a new director and onboarding and someone who is not necessarily directly associated with education. So having to sort of pull them into the district and the culture and then have them be able to create this dynamic approach is amazing. And I think as a parent, I say thank you because it makes me feel safer knowing that my kids are in a school that has the ability to prioritize this, right? We have the funding and we have the staff to do that. And I know all districts don't have that. So I commend you for putting our resources in that area because I think, unfortunately, as we see the world today, we need that more than we've ever had before. The second is the classified retention rate. I know this evening we had some conversations about turnover, but we have struggled in the area of classified staff, and 87% is pretty amazing. I mean, for that to be equivalent almost to our certified teachers is pretty darn good. So congratulations on that number because that is certainly not something we've experienced over the last couple of years. So. And the third thing is, thank you, and I'm not sure if Jen Ben's still back here, for the professional development. I think the spreadsheets and the tracking and sort of showing us the ROI on what is working and what people want to attend. And, you know, there's some that are better attended than others, obviously, but being able to demonstrate the participation and the specific content areas. So we can start to see, yes, that we've put budget towards this for many years and we know in theory that it's working, and then being able to see that translated so easily. Thank you. I know we've struggled to capture that in the past, and I think this does it really well. So thank you for doing that.
I agree and reiterate those areas are things that we've discussed in great detail, board to superintendent, and it's great to see progress in those and improvement for sure. For those of you who are not aware, this goal scorecard update falls in line with one of our largest responsibilities, which is evaluating the superintendent. We will have her mid-year evaluation on Thursday evening. This is the evidence we use to perform that evaluation. So it's very important to us that we have that evidence and that we can fairly evaluate the progress and improvement that we're seeing. So we look forward to doing that process on Thursday evening. Any other board member comments or questions on the superintendent goal scorecard? All right, then we will move on to our reports. First up is a report from Superintendent Gunning.
Madam President, members of the governing board, I'll keep mine short and sweet. Wigwam Creek Safety Symposium was a huge highlight. Attended 3 apple pie tours and 2 school showcases since the last time we spoke.
All right, then we will move on to item 9B, reports from the governing board members. Board members, item, what would you like to start?
Sure, I will keep it short. Actually, even though we were pretty busy, it was not as busy as the last months, which was kind of nice during the holiday season to just have time with family. So this past month, Superintendent Gunning mentioned we had 2 school tours. We were able to go to Rancho Santa Fe last week. The kids were the highlight of that whole thing with their cheer and dance and all their fun rah-rah. I love that. Their principal definitely was a cheerleader, and it comes out everywhere on that campus. But it was really awesome because the kids are all excited to be there and excited to show us what they know and show us all the different places of their campus. And just they have school spirit coming out every part of their bodies. It's amazing, and I loved it. It was awesome. Also, the highlight for me, actually, I would say, in when they were giving us information was when we had their different teams come in and share what they're doing. But for me, I really liked hearing from the woman that talked about their RTI process and how they go through with every student and they analyze where exactly they are so they know exactly where they need to be and what's lacking and how they can help them, and how there's a whole process for working with the parents and the teachers and the students to get kids where they need to be if they have an area where they're struggling in. And it was really nice also to hear from their specialists how when the kids see them for special services, how they send reports home to their parents. So I hope that all schools talk to each other and share that best practice, because as a parent of students in this district, I know how important it is to get that information of here's what my kids did, here's where they were struggling, here's where they're showing growth. Because when we talk about these end of the year assessments, that's just one score, but it's really great for parents to see where did my kids start and where did they end, to see that progress along the way, because not every kid starts at the same place, so they're not going to end at the same place necessarily. So I think it's really great how they send those reports home to parents. We also got to go today to Corte Sierra and see what's been going on there. And they had some student leaders also lead us around there and show us their specials areas. It was nice to see they have worked in their schedule, how they can have extended PLC time, I guess, for planning. And so we got to watch kind of the process of what the teachers go through for planning. And they were working on what they're going to do when we get back from break. And you got to see them break down different standards and how they were going to teach the kids through what games, what activities, what lessons. And so it was really great to see that in action, because we know that that's important for our teachers to work together and to collaborate, because our students are going to do better when they do that. So it was nice to see that as well. When we went to Corte last year, was the very end of the year. So it was all the exciting, look at all the fun stuff we're doing, but we didn't really get to have that meaty conversation with people. So it was nice to have that today for us as a board, I think, especially, and we can see what they're doing and how this is how they went from a C school to an A school, is by the work that they're putting in here. I was able to attend 2 Thanksgiving feasts at our campuses, where we put on at every campus has their Thanksgiving feast during the holidays. And it's really fun to see all the parents coming out and grandparents. And there's a ton of people at these schools, and they're really excited to eat turkey. Not my children. My children will not eat school lunches. So I was not able to enjoy school lunch, but it smelled delicious. And everybody that was there seemed to think it was really amazing. And so I'm sure it was great. They also, both campuses did turkey trots, so I was able to go and see their turkey trots on the same day. I'm just so glad to see us bringing back these fun things that we did with our students, because we want our kids to be excited to be at school, and you're excited to be at school when you have those extra special touches. So it was nice to see that happening as well. Our study session that we had at the end of November, I have to say, I think it was one of the best board meetings that we had this year. I think our board, every single person worked together as a team collaboratively. We were able to have conversations about stuff, and it was professional and polite the whole time. And so I'm excited to hopefully see that continue moving forward, because it was, I think, one of the best meetings we've had. We've had to talk about hard things, but we were able to do it in a way that everyone left not feeling bad. So it was nice to have that. This past weekend, I was able to participate in the Litchfield Park Christmas Parade with 2 of my board members. It was super fun. We got to ride around on a pretty car and see a lot of our families out there. It was also nice to see a lot of our students that were participating in the parade with various activities, and they were really excited to have us there. And then also on Saturday, so the Hacienda del Rey Assisted Living Community right over here by Wigwam Creek partners with that school, and they have this fundraiser that they've done for 3 years now. They call it the Holiday Express, where they have Santa out and families can come and walk around and see different vendors in the area, and they sell raffle tickets where you can try to win a bike or a hoverboard or things like that. And all the money that they raise from that goes directly back to Wigwam Creek Middle School, which is one of our Title I middle schools. And it's something I've just gone to the last 3 years. I don't have any kids at Wigwam Creek right now, but I do as a Title I school, as a former parent of students there. It's just a great way to give back to that school that doesn't have as much necessarily support as some of our schools maybe on the west side of town do. And the 3rd year in a row, my kids won something. So it was kind of fun. So that they won a hoverboard this year. So we'll see how that goes. One kid says it looks like a broken face. But it was just fun to be able to support the school. My kids got to see Santa, and it was just fun to see the community working together, because that's how we're going to see our kids be successful, is by partnering with our community members and finding ways to work together for the betterment of our students. One other thing I was able to do was the Rancho Santa Fe Walk to School Day is a really fun event that school has put on. This is the 2nd one now, where families meet at different meeting points in the community over there, and then they have people in the military that come out and walk with students. They have police officers from Avondale that come out and walk with students, and they're just engaging with the students the whole time and walking with them and talking to them. And it's a fun way to just get everybody coming together. They've got music playing when you get to school, which they do every single morning, but it's a little different when everybody's walking over. So it was really fun, and I appreciate all the service members that came out and walked with our kids, and the police officers that came and walked with our kids, and just made that a fun morning for the students as they were headed to school that day. And that's all I got for me.
Board Member Clymer?
Sure. I will try to do my best to keep this brief. So the month has been busy, but instead of highlighting everything, I'd like to just take a time to talk about 2 very special things. As Jody mentioned, we've been able to do 2 school tours, or school showcases, as the district calls them, for board members, both at Rancho Santa Fe and Corte Sierra, as board members Eineman just mentioned. Principal Zuniga, Principal Rodiger, thank you for taking time out of your day, your specialists, your aides. I mean, everyone that talked to us, that walked us through their classroom, that stopped what they were doing to answer our questions, excuse me. I know that it's not the easiest time to have a multitude of board members and district administrators on your campus, but it means the world to us, and it gives us an opportunity to actually see the effects of the budget decisions and the things that we're doing up here that we don't always have our hands on. So as we approach the halfway point, I can't believe we're already halfway through this school year. I just want to recognize the hard work of every single staff member so far this year. It seems like it's gone by really fast, but I know there have been some pretty slow moments over the last couple of months. So I've already started to see some positive outcomes of our efforts with new initiatives, the new positions. I mean, even though we know this is going to be a multi-year effort, we're already seeing positive outcomes in not only our benchmarks, but our parent communications and all, both kind of the hard data elements that we have, but also some of the soft data elements that we have. We're starting to see some acceleration, obviously, in our academic rebound in those numbers, which is excellent. And I just want to say that's due to every single person in this district working towards those same objectives. It doesn't matter if you drive a bus and you get our kids to school, you feed them breakfast or lunch during the day, you're an instructional aide that's doing small groups, or a teacher or a specialist who's coming up with plans and supplemental curriculum to help your kids learn, all the way up to our administrators. Every single person has a role here, and I really just don't see that we could have all of these new positions and all of these new initiatives over the last year or so be successful without everybody's help. So thank you for that. And just want to wish everybody a safe and happy holiday, and we'll see you back in January.
Dr. Dowling?
Yes, I just like to say it's been a pleasure, a privilege to be on the board for the last about 14 months. And I just wish everybody luck in the future, in the upcoming school year, or remainder of the school year, next school year. And Jody, good luck next year and a half as you begin to phase out of Litchfield. But I don't think the education is done with you yet, or you are done with education. I think your skill and knowledge that you'll continue to be in some fashion. I just wish everybody the best, and a happy holiday. And now I can go back and kind of relax instead of having all these, getting ready for board meetings and and talking to Michael and everybody else that I've talked to. I appreciate all the time you guys spent with me. I was kind of a burden, but with that, I'll just say good night and good luck.
Thank you, Dr. Dowling. I will also keep my board report somewhat succinct. I was able to attend an ASBA webinar on board policies this past month. That was very informative. One of the things that I have asked and Superintendent Gunning and I have been in discussion on is doing an audit or a review of our board policy. So that's something that we will be talking about as a board in the next few months, hopefully. I was able to attend 2 events at Western Sky Middle School, the first being the Thanksgiving feast, which I reiterate what board members Idema said. It's great to see so many families back on our campuses. I want to thank all of the staff, including Principal Garrett, who was out picking up garbage, and other volunteers, parent volunteers. And, that's an all hands on deck type of school event. And it was just a pleasure to go and spend time on the campus. In addition, I was able to attend their band concert, and they have a new band teacher this year, and he's doing a great job. Hard to follow Mr. Leggy, who came out of retirement to help over there at the last part of last year, but Mr. Milhone is doing a really great job. So that was a treat as well. I attended the study session that we had at the end of November. I also have spent many hours speaking with attorneys this month regarding the lawsuit that is now in federal court. Board member Honak has filed against the governing board and the district. I also was able to attend 2 school showcases, the Rancho Santa Fe and Corte Sierra showcase, and I reiterate what the other board members said about those being very informative events. I'm grateful to the students who took time out of their day to show us around, the campus leaders who take time out of their day to educate us on their processes that they go through to make sure that all of our students are successful. I appreciate that. And the last thing that I did this month, board members Idema referenced as well, which was we were able to participate in the Litchfield Park Holiday Parade, which we have not done before. But what I want to say about that is that the board members are humans, and having a positive experience like that in our community is super impactful. It was just a joy. It was a joy to see all of the students, and we saw probably 10 plus staff members and teachers in the crowd, and just to see the community come back together and everybody having a good time was just, really impactful. So I'm glad that we did that, and I hope that we make that an annual tradition, and I hope that Superintendent Gunning joins us next time, as well as maybe some of the other district admin. So with that, I'm going to close with lyrics from the Holiday Classic by Irving Berlin. Happy holiday. Happy holiday. While the merry bells keep ringing, happy holiday to you. The last item on our agenda is item 9C, which is our reports from administrators. This is an information-only item, and I would like to thank all the administrators for providing their reports this month and every month. It is very educational and informative to us as board members to see what is happening on your campus until we get the opportunity to come and see it for ourselves in person. Board members, item on?
I motion to adjourn.
I'll
I-
second. Thank you. Having a first and a second, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.